At a family reunion meant for laughter, her husband slammed the divorce papers onto the table, the music still playing. Guests frozen mid-laugh. "Sign it. Now," he barked, loud enough for everyone to hear. When she trembled and whispered for him to lower his voice, his mother scoffed, folding her arms. "This is where you belong, right here exposed." Fighting tears, she begged them to calm down, pleading that they could talk privately, that they could solve it like adults. Her voice cracked as she reminded them this was family, that guests were watching. He didn't care. "You don't get to talk anymore," he shouted. "Sign it fast and leave. You are not part of this reunion." Laughter turned to whispers as plates went untouched and eyes followed her shaking hands. Her mother-in-law smirked, urging her on. "Hurry up. Don't ruin the evening." With her dignity stripped away in front of everyone she once called family, she signed through tears while the room watched in silence. By the end of that night, the celebration had died, and the truth waiting in the shadows would soon make every single one of them regret that moment. Before we dive into this story, I need your help. YouTube only shows this to more people if you subscribe and comment. So hit that subscribe button right now. Then drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. Texas at midnight? Canada with morning coffee? Let me know you're here. We're a community, and your voice matters. Now let's jump in. Claire Winters never imagined that the sound of champagne hitting silk could destroy a life. But there it was, cold, sharp, deliberate, splashing across her shoulder in front of 200 people who had gathered not to celebrate, but to witness her destruction. The crystal glass slipped from Maribel's perfectly manicured hand with such calculated grace that Claire knew instantly this was no accident. This was a theater, and she was the sacrifice. The ballroom fell silent for exactly 3 seconds before the laughter started. Low at first, then building like thunder until it filled every corner of the mansion. Claire stood frozen, champagne dripping down her modest dress, her hands trembling at her sides, while every eye in the room locked onto her with a kind of hunger that comes before feeding. This was supposed to be a family reunion, a night of warmth and holiday joy. Instead, it became the night Claire learned that cruelty wears diamonds and speaks with perfect grammar. "Did you actually believe he chose you?" Maribel's voice sliced through the noise, smooth as honey and twice as poisonous. Her mother-in-law circled her slowly, each step deliberate, her emerald gown shimmering under the chandelier light. "Look at her, everyone. My son's little charity project." Phones lifted instantly, cameras angling for the perfect shot, recording every second of Claire's humiliation for an audience that would devour it with morning coffee. Claire wanted to run, wanted to disappear into the floor, but her legs had turned to stone. Have you ever stood in a room where every single person wanted to watch you break? Where the air itself felt like it was choking you? Maribel moved closer, her perfume overwhelming, her smile perfect and deadly. "You walked into this house thinking you were family. But darling, you can dress up a stray dog and it's still just a stray." The laughter came again, louder now, feeding on itself. Claire's throat closed, her vision blurred at the edges. But she forced herself to stand straight, to keep breathing, because collapsing would give them exactly what they wanted. Harold stepped forward next, his presence commanding instant attention. Her father-in-law had the kind of authority that made rooms go quiet without him saying a word. His gray suit was immaculate, his silver hair perfectly combed, his expression colder than the champagne soaking through Claire's dress. "Claire," he said, and the room leaned in to listen. "I'm curious about something. What exactly did you contribute to this family?" He paused, letting the question hang in the air like a noose. No money, no connections, no education worth mentioning, no family name. Each word landed like a hammer. Just need, desperation, the kind of hunger that makes a woman latch onto the first man who shows her kindness. Claire's nails dug into her palms, so hard she felt skin break. She'd learned how to hide pain growing up in foster care, moving from house to house, always the outsider, always the one nobody wanted to keep. But this was different. This wasn't strangers being cruel. This was the family she tried so hard to belong to, and they were ripping her apart with surgical precision. Sylvia glided over, her diamond necklace catching the light with every exaggerated movement. Graham's sister had always treated Claire like an amusing pet, something to be tolerated but never respected. "Oh, Daddy, don't be so harsh," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "She's an orphan. She doesn't understand how families like ours work." Sylvia leaned in close enough that Claire could see the satisfaction gleaming in her eyes. "Didn't your little orphan heart tell you that girls like you don't end up with men like my brother? That there are lines people like us don't cross?" She straightened up, adjusting her bracelet with deliberate slowness. "It's almost sad, really. Like watching a puppy try to join a wolf pack." The crowd loved it. More laughter, more whispers, more phones capturing every angle of Claire's destruction. Someone near the back shouted she actually thought she belonged here, and the room erupted again. Then Graham moved. Her husband, the man she'd loved with every broken piece of her heart, walked over from where he'd been watching by the fireplace. His face showed nothing. No anger, no defense, no love. Just a blank expression that somehow hurt worse than any insult. When he reached her, he didn't touch her, didn't even look at her directly. He simply leaned close enough that his breath warmed her ear. "I told you this would happen, Claire. I warned you they'd never accept you." His voice was quiet, intimate, devastating. "But you wouldn't listen. You thought love was enough." He pulled back slightly, and for just a moment their eyes met. Claire searched his face for something, anything that resembled the man she'd married. But there was nothing there, just emptiness. Then he raised his voice so the entire room could hear. "She really believed we had a future together. Isn't that sweet?" The laughter that followed was the worst yet. It came in waves, crashing over Claire until she felt like she was drowning in it. Each insult had been a weight pressing down on her chest. Each sneer had been a crack in the armor she'd built around her heart. But they weren't done. They took turns, each family member eager to deliver their blow, to prove their superiority by destroying someone weaker. And somewhere in the middle of that endless assault, something inside Claire shifted. A tiny spark flickered in the darkness, so small she barely noticed it. But it was there. Enough games. Maribel's voice cut through the chaos with the authority of someone used to being obeyed instantly. "Sign the papers, Claire. Sign them, and we'll let you leave with whatever scraps of dignity you have left." A leather folder appeared, thrust into Claire's trembling hands by a lawyer she'd never seen before. Her fingers fumbled with the clasp. Inside were divorce papers, her name already typed at the bottom of each page, waiting for her signature. Waiting for her to give up everything. "We're being generous," Harold added, his tone suggesting this was a business transaction, nothing more. "Sign now, and you'll walk away without further embarrassment. Refuse, and we'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of woman you really are." What kind of woman was that? Claire wanted to ask. The kind who believed in love? The kind who thought family meant something? But her voice wouldn't work. Her throat had closed completely. She looked around the ballroom one final time, at the faces watching her with satisfaction, at the phones recording her destruction, at Maribel's triumphant smile, at Harold's cold calculation, at Sylvia's gleeful cruelty, at Graham's complete indifference. This was her family. These were the people she tried so desperately to please, to belong to love. And they were treating her like garbage to be disposed of. Her hand shook as she picked up the pen. It felt impossibly heavy, like it was made of lead instead of metal. She pressed it to the first line, and her hand froze. Could she really do this? Could she really sign away her marriage, her hope, her belief that she mattered to anyone? "We're waiting," Maribel said, her voice sharp with impatience. Claire forced her hand to move. She signed the first line, then the second, then the third. Each signature felt like carving pieces out of her own soul. The room watched in silence now, fascinated by her surrender. She signed page after page, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. When she reached the final signature, her hand paused one last time. This was it, the moment she gave up everything. She pressed the pen down and signed her name. The pen clattered to the marble floor, the sound echoing through the silent ballroom like a gunshot. Maribel snatched the papers from her hands immediately, checking each signature with the efficiency of someone closing a business deal. "Perfect," she said, satisfaction dripping from the word. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's official. She's no longer part of this family." She turned to Claire with a smile that could cut glass. "You're free now, dear. Free to go back to whatever hole you crawled out of. Try not to let the door hit you on the way out." The laughter started again, but Claire barely heard it. She felt hollow, empty, like someone had reached inside her chest and removed everything that mattered. She stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then she turned toward the door. Each step felt like walking through water. Behind her, the party resumed. Music started playing again. Champagne glasses clinked. Conversations picked up as if nothing had happened. They had already forgotten her. She was nothing to them now. Less than nothing. Just a mistake that had been corrected. Claire pushed through the massive oak doors and stepped into the cold night air. It hit her face like a slap, sharp and clean compared to the suffocating atmosphere inside. She walked down the marble steps, her legs moving on autopilot, her mind still trapped in that ballroom. The sound of laughter and music faded behind her until there was only silence and the crunch of gravel under her feet. She had no car, no phone with any battery left, no money except for the few dollars in her purse, no family, no husband, no home, nothing. She had walked into that mansion with hope in her heart and left with nothing but the clothes on her back and champagne stains on her shoulder. But even as tears finally began to stream down her face, even as the full weight of what had happened crashed over her like a wave, that tiny spark inside her chest refused to die. She didn't understand it yet, didn't recognize it for what it was. But it was there, buried beneath the pain and humiliation, burning quietly in the darkness. It whispered one impossible word: wait. The world saw her as broken, powerless, finished. The family had destroyed her publicly, completely, without mercy. They had taken everything from her and laughed while doing it. But they had made one critical mistake. They assumed that breaking someone meant defeating them. They assumed that humiliation meant surrender. They assumed that a woman with nothing left had nothing left to fight with. Claire Winters had signed those divorce papers in tears, believing she had lost everything. She had no idea that she had just signed the beginning of their end. Would you have survived what Claire just endured? Could you have stood there while everyone you tried to love tore you apart piece by piece? She did. And that spark inside her, that tiny, stubborn flame that refused to go out, would soon become an inferno. Because patience isn't weakness. Silence isn't surrender. And a woman with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous kind of woman there is. They had humiliated her, destroyed her, cast her out like trash. But they hadn't killed that spark. And that was the mistake that would cost them everything. Claire didn't remember walking. She didn't remember the route she took or how long she'd been moving through the cold streets. One moment she was standing outside the mansion, tears freezing on her cheeks, and the next she was sitting in a booth at a diner she'd never seen before. The place was old, forgotten by time, with cracked vinyl seats and fluorescent lights that buzzed like dying insects. The smell of burnt coffee and old grease hung in the air, but it was warm. And after the ice-cold cruelty of that ballroom, warmth felt like mercy. Claire's hands shook as she pressed them flat against the chipped Formica table, trying to ground herself in something real. Her phone sat beside her, the screen black, the battery at 2%. Her only connection to the outside world was dying, just like everything else in her life. The waitress appeared without Claire noticing her approach, an older woman with gray streaks in her dark hair and eyes that had seen too much suffering to judge anyone else's. She set down a cup of coffee without asking, the steam rising between them like a peace offering. "Rough night?" the waitress asked, her voice rough but kind. Claire looked up, and whatever the woman saw in her face made her expression soften even more. "Honey, you look like you just walked through hell." Claire tried to speak, but her throat closed around the words. She nodded instead, wrapping her frozen fingers around the warm cup. The waitress didn't push. She just pulled out a rag and wiped down the already clean table, giving Claire space to exist without explanation. "I've been where you are," the woman said quietly. "Different details, same feeling. Like the whole world just proved you don't matter." She paused, meeting Claire's eyes. "But you're still breathing. That counts for something." Then she walked away, leaving Claire alone with her coffee and the storm raging inside her head. Have you ever felt so alone that even sitting in a room full of people felt like floating in empty space? That's where Claire was. Isolated, abandoned, completely cut off from anything that resembled safety or belonging. She stared into her coffee cup, watching the liquid swirl in slow circles, and let herself finally process what had happened. They had humiliated her in front of hundreds of people. They had stripped away her dignity, her marriage, her sense of self, and they had done it with smiles on their faces. Graham hadn't defended her, hadn't even hesitated. He joined them, adding his voice to the chorus of cruelty, like she was nothing more than an embarrassment to be disposed of. The divorce papers were signed. Her marriage was over. Her life, as she knew it, was finished. She had nowhere to go, no one to call, no money to start over. She was exactly what Maribel had called her. Nothing. The thought should have broken her completely. But that spark, that small, stubborn flame that had flickered to life in the ballroom, refused to let her surrender. It burned quietly in her chest, keeping her upright when everything in her wanted to collapse. Claire shifted in the booth, and something crinkled beneath her. She looked down, confused, and saw the edge of an envelope sticking out from under the ripped vinyl seat cushion. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it, pulling it free. It was old, yellowed with age, the paper soft from years of being forgotten. Her name was written on the front, in handwriting she recognized instantly. Her mother's handwriting. Claire's heart stopped. Her mother had died when she was 7 years old, leaving her alone in a system that never wanted her. She'd spent her entire childhood believing her mother had left her nothing. No money, no family, no legacy. Just abandonment. But here, in this forgotten diner in the middle of nowhere, was an envelope with her name written in her mother's hand. How was that possible? Her fingers shook so hard she almost couldn't open it. Inside were papers, legal documents, old letters with dates going back decades, and a single photograph of her mother standing in front of a building Claire didn't recognize. She unfolded the first letter with trembling hands and began to read. The words blurred at first, her eyes still raw from crying. But then they came into focus, and the world tilted on its axis. Her mother hadn't abandoned her. Her mother had left her a fortune, an inheritance deliberately hidden, buried beneath layers of legal complications and trust structures that had kept it secret for 20 years. Claire's hands went numb. The letter explained everything in careful detail. Her mother had been wealthy, the daughter of a family that had made their money in shipping and real estate. When she died unexpectedly, the inheritance had been placed in a trust with specific instructions that Claire couldn't access it until certain conditions were met. But somewhere along the way, the lawyers had lost track of her. The foster system had moved her from home to home, and the paper trail had gone cold. The inheritance had been sitting there all these years, waiting, while Claire had struggled and starved and believed herself worthless. "Oh my God," Claire whispered, the words barely audible. Her mother had left her millions. Not thousands. Millions. Enough money to change everything, to rewrite her entire life. And she'd never known. She'd signed those divorce papers, thinking she had nothing, thinking she was powerless, thinking she had no choice but to accept whatever scraps the family was willing to throw her. But she'd been wrong. Completely, devastatingly wrong. The irony hit her like a physical blow. While Maribel had been mocking her poverty, while Harold had been questioning her worth, while Sylvia had been calling her an orphan with nothing to offer, Claire had been sitting on a fortune that dwarfed anything the family could claim. They had humiliated her for being poor when she was actually richer than all of them combined. Would you have laughed or cried in that moment? Would you have felt vindicated or furious? Claire felt both, the emotions crashing through her in waves so powerful she could barely breathe. She read through every document with shaking hands, her mind racing faster than her eyes could follow the words. Bank account numbers, property deeds, stock certificates, trust documents. Everything was real. Everything was legitimate. And everything was hers. But there was more. At the bottom of the envelope was a smaller note, written in different handwriting. Elegant. Careful. It was dated just 3 months ago. Claire, if you're reading this, then you found what your mother left for you. My name is Evelyn. I'm your mother's cousin, which makes me your family. I've been the trustee of your inheritance since your mother passed, and I've been searching for you for years. The family you married into doesn't know about me. They don't know about this money, and they certainly don't know what I know about them. When you're ready, call this number. We have much to discuss. And Claire, what they did to you tonight will not go unanswered. Trust me, Evelyn. Claire stared at the phone number written at the bottom of the note, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She had a family, real family, someone who had been looking for her, who knew about the inheritance, who knew about tonight's humiliation, someone who wanted to help. The isolation that had been crushing her chest suddenly felt less suffocating. She wasn't alone. She'd never been alone. She just hadn't known it. Her phone buzzed, the 2% battery warning flashing across the screen. She had maybe minutes before it died completely. Her fingers moved before her brain could catch up, typing the number from Evelyn's note into her phone and pressing call. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. Claire's heart climbed into her throat. What if it was disconnected? What if this was all some cruel joke? Then a voice answered, smooth and warm and surprisingly young. Claire. The woman's voice carried relief and something else, satisfaction. I've been waiting for your call. Claire opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her throat had closed again, this time with emotions she couldn't even name. It's okay, Evelyn continued, her voice gentle but firm. You don't have to say anything yet. I know what happened tonight. I know what they did to you. And I know you're sitting in that diner right now wondering if any of this is real. Claire's eyes went wide. How did she know where she was? I've had people watching you for months. Evelyn explained, as if reading her mind. Not to invade your privacy, but to protect you. That family you married into is dangerous, Claire. More dangerous than you realize. But so are we. So are you. The line went quiet for a moment, and Claire could hear her own ragged breathing. Here's what's going to happen, Evelyn said, her voice taking on a quality that reminded Claire of a general planning a battle. A car is going to pull up outside that diner in exactly 3 minutes. The driver's name is Marcus. He's going to take you somewhere safe, somewhere warm, somewhere they can't find you. And tomorrow, you and I are going to sit down and discuss exactly how we're going to make them pay for what they did to you tonight. Why? Claire finally managed to whisper, her voice cracking on the single word. Why are you helping me? Evelyn's laugh was soft, but carried an edge sharp enough to cut. Because they destroyed someone I loved, Claire. Your mother was more than my cousin. She was my best friend. And when she died, I made her a promise that I would take care of you, protect you, and make sure her legacy reached you when you needed it most. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was steel wrapped in silk. Tonight, they proved you need it. So now we begin. Are you ready? Was she ready? Claire looked around the diner, at the cracked vinyl, the buzzing lights, the kind waitress who had seen her pain. She looked down at the envelope in her hands, at her mother's handwriting, at the documents that proved she was not nothing, not worthless, not powerless. She thought about Maribel's smile, Harold's cold calculation, Sylvia's cruelty, Graham's betrayal, and that spark inside her chest, that tiny flame that had refused to die, suddenly roared to life. Yes, Claire said, and her voice was steady for the first time all night. I'm ready. Outside, headlights appeared in the darkness, a black car pulling smoothly to the curb. Through the diner window, Claire could see a driver in a suit step out and look toward the entrance. Marcus. Her escape. Her beginning. She stood up, leaving money on the table for the coffee, even though the waitress had never asked for payment, and walked toward the door. The cold night air hit her again, but this time it felt different. Not like punishment. like cleansing. She slid into the back seat of the car, and Marcus nodded at her through the rearview mirror. "Miss Winters," he said, his voice professional and respectful in a way that made her chest tighten. "It's an honor to finally meet you. Your mother would be very proud." Then he pulled away from the diner, and Claire watched through the back window as it disappeared into the darkness behind them. She had walked into that family reunion as Graham's unwanted wife. She had left as nothing. But now, driving through the night toward an unknown future, she was becoming something else entirely. Someone with power. Someone with family. Someone with a plan. They had humiliated her, broken her, thrown her away like garbage. But they had made one critical mistake. They had assumed she would stay broken, that she would disappear quietly, that she would accept her defeat and fade into nothing. They were wrong. And by the time Claire was done, they would understand exactly how wrong they had been. The spark had become a flame, and flames, when given enough fuel, become infernos. The safe house wasn't what Claire expected. She'd imagined something cold and sterile, a temporary shelter with bare walls and functional furniture. Instead, Marcus pulled up to a brownstone in a quiet neighborhood where trees lined the streets and lights glowed warm in windows. The kind of place where families lived, where children played, where normal people built normal lives. Everything Claire had never had. Evelyn was waiting at the door, and when Claire stepped out of the car, she felt her breath catch. The woman looked like her mother. Same dark hair touched with silver, same elegant posture, same eyes that seemed to see straight through pretense into truth. But where her mother's photographs showed softness and warmth, Evelyn carried something harder, something sharper. She looked like a woman who had spent years planning for war. "Claire," Evelyn said, and the single word carried decades of waiting. She opened her arms, and Claire, who had spent the entire night being torn apart by people who should have loved her, stepped into an embrace from a stranger who actually did. They stood like that for a long moment, Claire's body finally releasing the tension it had been holding since the champagne hit her shoulder. When they pulled apart, Evelyn's eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. "Come inside. We have work to do." The house was beautiful in a way that felt lived in rather than staged. Books lined the walls, soft rugs covered hardwood floors, and photographs of people Claire didn't recognize smiled from every surface. Family. Real family. The kind that stayed. Evelyn led her to a study where a fire crackled in the fireplace, and two leather chairs faced each other across a coffee table covered in documents. "Sit," Evelyn said, pouring tea from a pot that was already waiting. Claire sank into the chair, her body exhausted, but her mind racing. "I know you have questions. I know you're confused and angry and probably terrified that this is all some kind of dream." Evelyn handed her a cup, then settled into the opposite chair with the grace of someone who commanded boardrooms and courtrooms with equal ease. "So, let me start by telling you the truth. Your mother and I grew up together. We were more like sisters than cousins. When she got pregnant with you, her family disowned her, said she'd brought shame on the family name by falling in love with a man who wasn't wealthy or connected." Evelyn's jaw tightened. They were monsters. "So your mother left. She took the inheritance her grandmother had left her, the one they couldn't touch, and she built a life for herself. For you." Claire's hands trembled around the teacup. She'd never known any of this. "When she died, she made me promise two things. First, that I would protect her fortune until you were old enough to claim it. Second, that I would protect you from the family that destroyed her." "But you didn't," Claire whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. "I grew up in foster care, alone, moving from house to house, never belonging anywhere." The accusation hung between them, sharp and undeniable. Evelyn's face crumpled with genuine pain. "I know, and that's my greatest failure. When your mother died, the lawyers were supposed to find you, place you with me. But there was an error, a deliberate error, I later discovered. Someone in the firm had ties to your mother's family, and they made sure the paperwork got lost. By the time I realized what had happened, you'd disappeared into the system. I spent years searching, Claire. Years. But foster care records are sealed, Names change, and you were moved so many times. She leaned forward, her eyes fierce. I finally found you 6 months ago. The day you married Graham Winters. Claire's blood went cold. You knew? You knew I was marrying into that family, and you didn't warn me. Evelyn's expression hardened. I tried. I sent letters. I called. But they were intercepted. Mary Belle Winters is many things, but stupid isn't one of them. She has connections everywhere. Lawyers, judges, private investigators. The moment I found you, she knew someone was looking. So she built a wall around you. Evelyn pulled a folder from the table and opened it, revealing photographs that made Claire's stomach turn. Pictures of her and Graham, some taken before they were even dating. Images of her at work, at the grocery store, walking home. They've been watching you since before you met Graham. This wasn't an accident, Claire. It was a plan. The words didn't make sense. Claire shook her head, trying to process. What plan? Why would they even care about me? Evelyn's smile was cold and sharp as broken glass. Because Mary Belle did her research. She discovered that you were the heir to a fortune, and she decided that fortune should belong to her family. So she arranged for Graham to meet you, to charm you, to marry you. The room spun. Claire gripped the arms of her chair, her knuckles white. No, that's not. Graham loved me. He said what you needed to hear. Evelyn cut in, her voice gentle but unrelenting. Graham Winters is a trust fund baby with expensive tastes and no actual talent for making money. His family's wealth is mostly image, Claire. Old money that's been spent and borrowed against until there's almost nothing left. They needed an infusion of cash, and you were the solution. The plan was simple. Marry you, wait until the inheritance cleared, then divorce you and take half. Maybe more if they could prove you were an unfit wife. She paused, letting that sink in. But they got impatient. They decided public humiliation would be faster. Force you to sign the papers before you discover the truth about your mother's money. Have you ever had someone rip away the foundation of your entire reality? That's what Claire felt. Every moment with Graham, every whispered promise, every touch, it had all been a lie. A calculated performance designed to rob her blind. How much? Claire asked, her voice hollow. How much did my mother leave me? Evelyn pulled out another document and slid it across the table. Claire looked down at the number and felt the world tilt again. $47 million. Properties in 3 states. Stock portfolios that had been carefully managed and grown over 2 decades. Her mother had left her enough money to never worry about anything ever again. And Mary Belle's family had tried to steal it all. They don't know yet, Evelyn said quietly. The inheritance only became accessible 2 weeks ago, when you turned 28. Your mother's instructions were specific. You had to reach that age before the trust could be dissolved. Graham's timeline was off. He thought he had more time to secure the marriage before the money came through. That's why they panicked tonight. Someone tipped them off that the trust was about to clear, and they needed you gone before you found out. Claire looked up, and Evelyn must have seen something in her expression, because she nodded slowly. That's right. You signed those divorce papers as a penniless orphan. But legally, as of 2 weeks ago, you're one of the wealthiest women in the state. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. Then Claire asked the question that mattered most. What happens now? Evelyn's smile was predatory. Now we make them pay, but not with tantrums or public scenes. We do this intelligently, strategically. We study them like they studied you. We find every weakness, every debt, every dirty secret. And then when the moment is perfect, we dismantle everything they built. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes glittering with anticipation. Your mother's family destroyed her for loving the wrong man. Graham's family tried to destroy you for being born with the wrong last name. But they made one critical mistake, Claire. They assumed you would stay broken, that you would disappear, that you would accept defeat and fade away into nothing. Evelyn's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than a shout. Show me I'm wrong. Show me that you're not broken, that you're your mother's daughter, that you're ready to take back everything they tried to steal. Claire sat perfectly still, the firelight casting shadows across her face. Every insult from that ballroom played through her mind. Every cruel word, every mocking laugh, every second of humiliation. But now they were transformed from wounds into weapons. Now they were fuel. She thought about Maribel's satisfied smirk, Harold's cold dismissal, Sylvia's gleeful cruelty, Graham's empty eyes. And she felt something shift inside her chest. That spark that had kept her standing through the worst night of her life suddenly blazed into something bigger. Something unstoppable. Rage. Pure, focused, intelligent rage. Not the kind that screams and destroys randomly. The kind that plans. The kind that waits. The kind that strikes with surgical precision when the target least expects it. "I want to know everything," Claire said, and her voice was steady as steel. "Every debt Graham has. Every affair Maribel's had. Every secret they're hiding. Every lie they've told. I want names, dates, evidence. Everything." Evelyn's smile widened. "I was hoping you'd say that." She pulled out another folder, this one much thicker. "I've been collecting information for months. Graham has gambling debts he's hidden from his family. Harold's company is leveraged to the point of collapse. Sylvia's husband is having an affair with her best friend. And Maribel." Evelyn paused for effect. "Maribel has been embezzling from the family trust for years to maintain her lifestyle. If it ever came to light, she'd face criminal charges." Claire felt something cold and satisfying settle in her chest. They had vulnerabilities, weaknesses, pressure points she could exploit. "But we don't move yet," Evelyn cautioned. "We wait. We watch. We let them think they've won. Let them celebrate your destruction. And while they're laughing, we build our case. We position our pieces. We prepare for the moment when we can take everything from them the same way they tried to take everything from you." "How long?" Claire asked. Evelyn considered. 3 months. Maybe 4. Long enough for them to forget about you. Long enough for them to get careless. She met Claire's eyes. "Can you be patient? Can you stay hidden while they think you're defeated? Can you watch them celebrate and not reveal yourself too soon?" Could she? 3 months of hiding while they laughed at her destruction. 3 months of watching Graham move on with his life. 3 months of letting them think they'd won. It sounded like torture, but it also sounded like strategy. Like the difference between revenge and justice. Between a tantrum and a war. Claire thought about her mother, who had built a fortune in secret to protect her daughter. She thought about Evelyn, who had spent years searching for a family she'd never met. She thought about the woman she'd been this morning. Naive, trusting, desperately trying to belong somewhere. That woman was gone. Destroyed in a ballroom full of cruel laughter and champagne stains. But someone new was being born in this study, surrounded by evidence and firelight and the promise of retribution. Someone patient. Someone dangerous. Someone who understood that real power doesn't announce itself with noise. It moves in silence. It waits in the shadows. And when it strikes, it leaves nothing standing. "Yes," Claire said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. "I can wait. I can be patient. I can be whatever I need to be to make them pay for what they did." Evelyn reached across the table and took her hand. "Good. Because we're going to do more than make them pay, Claire. We're going to teach them a lesson they'll never forget. We're going to show them what happens when you underestimate someone. When you mistake quiet for weak. When you confuse kindness with stupidity." She squeezed Claire's hand once, then released it. "Welcome to your inheritance, Claire Winters. Welcome to your power. And welcome to the beginning of their end." Outside, the night had grown deeper. Somewhere across the city, the Winters family was probably still celebrating. Still laughing about the orphan who had dared to think she belonged. Still toasting their victory over someone they considered beneath them. But here, in this brownstone with its warm lights and leather chairs and decades of careful planning, the real victory was just beginning. Claire had signed those divorce papers, thinking she had nothing left. She had walked out of that mansion believing herself powerless. But now she knows the truth. She wasn't powerless. She never had been. She'd just been waiting for the right moment to show them exactly how wrong they were. And that moment was coming. Like thunder after lightning. Like fire after the match. Inevitable. Unstoppable. Devastating. They had planted the seed of their own destruction the moment they made her sign those papers in tears. Now that seed was growing in the darkness. And when it finally broke through the surface, it would destroy everything they'd built on lies and cruelty and greed. The question wasn't if they would pay. The question was how much. And Claire, sitting in that study with her mother's fortune and Evelyn's expertise and her own quiet, burning rage, knew the answer. Everything. They would pay everything. 3 months passed like a held breath. Claire spent every day learning, studying, transforming herself from the woman who had signed those papers in tears into someone the Winters family wouldn't recognize. Evelyn was a relentless teacher, drilling her on corporate law, financial structures, and the art of strategic warfare. Power isn't about money, Evelyn told her one morning as they reviewed documents in the study. It's about knowing exactly where to apply pressure so that everything collapses at once. Claire absorbed every lesson, like someone learning to breathe underwater. She studied the family's business dealings, their social connections, and their carefully maintained public image. She learned that Harold's company was 2 bad quarters away from bankruptcy. That Graham had borrowed money from dangerous people to cover gambling losses. That Mary Bell's charity foundation was actually a shell for tax evasion. Every secret was a weapon. Every weakness was an opportunity. And Claire was building an arsenal. The holiday gala was Evelyn's idea. They throw one every year, she explained, pulling up the invitation on her tablet. Black tie, 200 guests, all the important families in the city. It's where they show off their wealth and connections, where they prove they're untouchable. She looked at Claire with eyes that gleamed with anticipation. This year you're going to attend. Not as Graham's rejected wife. Not as the orphan they humiliated. As yourself. As the woman you've become. Claire's stomach twisted with nerves and something else. Something that felt like hunger. Won't they recognize me? Evelyn smiled. They'll recognize your face. But they won't recognize your power. People see what they expect to see, Claire. They expect you to be broken, hiding somewhere, too ashamed to show yourself. They won't expect you to walk into their sanctuary with your head high and your weapons loaded. She paused. Can you do it? Can you face them again? Could she? Claire thought about that night 3 months ago. The champagne. The laughter. The signatures on those divorce papers. Then she thought about everything she'd learned since. Every secret she now knew. Every piece of leverage she held. Every card she could play to destroy them. Yes, Claire said, and she meant it with steel in her voice. I can face them. I want to face them. The dress Evelyn chose was perfect. Understated elegance in midnight blue, expensive without being flashy, tailored to make Claire look powerful rather than desperate for attention. Her hair was swept back in a simple style that showed her face clearly. No hiding. No apologies. Just confidence. When Claire looked at herself in the mirror the night of the gala, she barely recognized the woman staring back. 3 months ago she'd been hollow-cheeked and trembling. Now she looked like someone who owned every room she entered. Remember, Evelyn said as Marcus pulled the car up to the front entrance. You're not there for confrontation. Not yet. Tonight is about presence. About showing them you exist. About making them uncomfortable without saying a word. She squeezed Claire's hand. Let them wonder. Let them worry. Let them spend the whole night trying to figure out what you're doing there and what you know. Fear is a weapon, Claire. Use it. The mansion was exactly as she remembered. Huge, opulent, dripping with wealth and arrogance. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across marble floors. String quartets played in corners. Waiters circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. Claire stepped through the entrance, and the room didn't fall silent. That only happened in movies. But heads turned. Conversations stuttered. She felt the shift in the air like a pressure change before a storm. There, by the fireplace, Mary Bell stood frozen with a glass halfway to her lips. Across the room, Harold's conversation died mid-sentence. Sylvia's laugh cut off so abruptly it sounded like a cough. And Graham stared at her with an expression that might have been shocking or might have been something darker. Claire didn't rush. She moved through the crowd with practiced grace, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, even though she had no intention of drinking it. She was making a statement. She belonged here. She had every right to be here. And they couldn't do anything about it. Claire. The voice came from behind her, dripping with false sweetness. She turned to find Sylvia approaching, diamonds glittering at her throat, confusion barely masked by her practiced smile. What a surprise. We didn't expect to see you tonight. Claire met her gaze steadily. Why wouldn't I attend? It's a holiday gala, open to everyone with an invitation. She paused, letting the implication hang. I have an invitation. Sylvia's smile tightened. Yes, but after everything that happened, we thought you'd want to keep a low profile. Avoid any awkwardness. The condescension in her tone was thick enough to cut. Claire allowed herself a small smile. Awkward for whom, Sylvia? I'm simply here to enjoy the evening. Unless there's some reason I shouldn't be. The question landed exactly as intended. Sylvia's eyes flickered with uncertainty. She opened her mouth, closed it, then managed, of course not. It's just unexpected. Then she walked away quickly, heading straight for her mother. Claire watched her go, satisfaction warming her chest. First strike landed. Maribel appeared next, moving through the crowd with the confidence of someone who believed she controlled every situation. Claire, darling, she said, her voice loud enough to draw attention. How lovely to see you've recovered from your little episode. We were all so worried. The false concern was masterful. It painted Claire as unstable, emotional, someone who'd had a breakdown rather than been publicly humiliated. Claire had learned from Evelyn how to counter this. She smiled warmly. How kind of you to worry, Maribel. But I assure you, I've never been better. In fact, the last few months have been remarkably enlightening. She let the word hang there, watching Maribel's eyes narrow slightly. I've had time to really understand my position, my mother's legacy, what I'm truly worth. Each sentence was carefully chosen, vague enough to be innocent, specific enough to suggest she knew something. Maribel's smile never wavered, but her eyes went cold. Your mother's legacy? I wasn't aware she'd left you anything substantial. Claire took a sip of champagne, maintaining perfect composure. There's a lot you don't know about my mother, Maribel. I didn't know myself until recently. But I'm learning. Every day, I'm learning more. The conversation around them had gone quiet. People were listening now, sensing tension, drawn to potential drama like sharks to blood. Maribel leaned in closer, her voice dropping. Whatever you think you know, dear, I'd be careful about sharing it. Rumors can be so damaging, especially for someone in your position. The threat was clear. But Claire had been preparing for this moment for 3 months. My position, she repeated softly. Yes, let's talk about that. I'm curious, Maribel. When you and your family humiliated me 3 months ago, did you consider what my position might actually be? Or did you just assume? Before Maribel could respond, Harold appeared, his expression thunderous. Claire, I need a word. Privately. It wasn't a request. It was a command from someone used to being obeyed. Claire turned to him with the same calm smile. I'm afraid I'm not interested in private words, Harold. If you have something to say, you can say it here. His jaw tightened. You're making a scene. Am I? Claire looked around innocently. I'm simply attending a party. Having conversations. Isn't that what one does at galas? Graham pushed through the crowd, his face flushed with alcohol or anger or both. What the hell are you doing here? His voice was too loud, too aggressive. Several people stepped back, giving him space. Claire looked at her ex-husband with none of a love she'd once felt. Just a cold assessment. I'm attending a holiday party, Graham. The same as you. He moved closer, lowering his voice. You signed the papers. We're done. You have no reason to be here. Claire tilted her head slightly. Actually, I have every reason. You see, I've discovered some interesting things about my family, about my mother's estate, about certain financial arrangements that were made without my knowledge. She watched his face carefully. Tell me, Graham, did you know about my inheritance when you proposed? Or did your mother fill you in later? The color drained from his face. Beside him, Maribel went rigid. Claire pressed her advantage, her voice still soft but carrying to the edges of the crowd. Because I'm trying to understand the timeline. When exactly did this family decide I was worth marrying? Before or after you discovered what my mother left me? The silence that followed was absolute. Every eye in the room was locked on them now, watching the drama unfold. Graham opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Maribel recovered first, her voice sharp. I don't know what delusions you've developed, Claire, but you're embarrassing yourself. Claire laughed, a genuine sound that rang through the room. Am I? Or am I just stating facts? Let me share another fact. My mother's estate was worth $47 million. It was placed in trust, managed carefully, and became accessible to me exactly 2 weeks before your family forced me to sign those divorce papers. She let that sink in, watching faces pale, watching whispers spread. So I'm curious. Did you panic when you realized the timeline was wrong? Is that why you humiliated me publicly instead of waiting? Because you knew if I discovered the truth, I'd never sign. Have you ever watched someone's entire world collapse in real time? That's what Claire was witnessing. Graham looked like he might be sick. Maribel's carefully maintained composure was cracking. Harold's face had gone from red to white. Then came the twist that even Claire hadn't planned. A woman stepped out of the crowd, beautiful, young, draped in designer clothing Claire recognized from Graham's credit card statements. Graham, the woman said, her voice uncertain. What is she talking about? Claire turned to her with interest. And you must be Vivian, the mistress Graham's been hiding from his family while pretending the divorce was about me being unsuitable. She'd seen the reports Evelyn had compiled. The receipts from hotels, restaurants, jewelry stores. All charged to accounts Graham didn't think anyone was monitoring. Vivian's face went scarlet. I'm not a mistress. Graham and I are engaged. The gasps from the crowd were audible now. Maribel spun on her son. Engaged? You've been divorced for 3 months, and you're already engaged. But Claire wasn't done. She pulled out her phone, the new one Evelyn had given her, loaded with information, and pulled up a document. Speaking of engagements and finances, I'm also curious about something else, Graham. These gambling debts you've accumulated. The ones you borrowed from some very dangerous people to cover. Does Vivian know about those? Does your mother? The room erupted. Conversations exploded on all sides. Phones came out, recording, photographing. Graham lunged forward, but Marcus appeared from nowhere, stepping between them with the quiet authority of someone who'd handled worse. I think that's enough excitement for one evening, Marcus said calmly. Miss Winters was just leaving. Claire looked around the room one last time, at the shocked faces, the whispered conversations. The family that had destroyed her now stands exposed and vulnerable. She'd done exactly what Evelyn had told her to do. She'd shown them she existed. She'd made them uncomfortable. She'd planted seeds of doubt and fear that would grow in the darkness. You're right, she said softly. I am leaving. But before I go, one more thing. She looked directly at Maribel. You said I'd never belong here. You were right. I don't belong with people who measure worth by cruelty and judge value by bank accounts. But what you didn't understand is that I never wanted to belong here. I wanted to belong to a family, and you taught me the difference. She turned toward the exit, then paused. Oh, and Maribel? About those charitable foundation discrepancies your accountant discovered last week? The ones you've been trying to hide? I'd suggest getting a very good lawyer. The IRS tends to notice patterns eventually. The walk to the door felt like walking through water. Every step was heavy with the weight of what she'd just done. But Claire kept her head high, her shoulders back, her pace steady. Behind her, chaos was erupting. Accusations were flying. The perfect image the Winters family had maintained for generations was crumbling in real time. And it was all because Claire had done something they never expected. She'd learned patience. She'd gathered power. And she'd waited for exactly the right moment to show them who she'd become. Marcus held the car door open and Claire slid inside, her whole body trembling with adrenaline. Evelyn was waiting in the back seat, her smile proud. "Well," she asked. Claire let out a long breath, then smiled back. "The storm has started, and they have no idea how much worse it's going to get." The morning after the gala, Claire sat in Evelyn's study watching the fallout unfold across social media and news outlets. Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications, but she ignored them all. This wasn't about attention or vindication. This was about strategy, about understanding exactly how her revelation had shifted the battlefield. "Look at this," Evelyn said, turning her laptop so Claire could see the screen. A society columnist had written a scathing piece titled, "The Winters Family's Hidden Scandal. Fortune Hunter or Hunted Fortune?" The article dissected everything Claire had revealed at the gala, painting the family in increasingly damaging light. "They're scrambling," Evelyn continued, scrolling through more articles. Harold's office issued 3 different statements in the last hour, each contradicting the previous one. Maribel's phone has been ringing nonstop. And Graham. She pulled up a tabloid photo of him leaving Vivian's apartment looking disheveled and haunted. "He's realizing the gambling debts you mentioned are about to become very public. His creditors are already calling in loans." Claire studied the images with detached interest. 3 months ago, seeing Graham in pain would have broken her heart. Now it felt like watching a chess piece fall exactly where she'd predicted. "What about the charity foundation?" Evelyn's smile was sharp. "The IRS received an anonymous tip this morning. Very detailed. Very well documented. They'll be launching an investigation within the week." She closed the laptop and looked at Claire with something like pride. "You understand what you've done, don't you? You didn't just embarrass them. You dismantled their credibility, their social standing, their carefully constructed image of untouchable wealth and power. In one night, you made them vulnerable." Claire nodded slowly. "But vulnerability isn't destruction. They're wounded, not defeated. They'll fight back." Evelyn leaned forward. "Of course they will. That's why we don't stop here. That's why patience matters. We wait. We watch them make mistakes. We let them expose themselves further while trying to defend against attacks they don't fully understand." She paused. "The question is, can you maintain control? Can you resist the urge to strike again before the moment is right?" Could she? Claire thought about the satisfaction she'd felt watching their faces at the gala. The rush of power when Graham couldn't meet her eyes. The vindication of proving she wasn't the broken woman they discarded. It would be easy to keep pushing, to use every weapon she'd gathered to destroy them completely right now. But Evelyn had taught her better. Revenge rushed was revenge wasted. True power came from precision, from knowing exactly when and how to apply pressure, so the damage was irreversible. "I can wait," Claire said. "But I need to know what we're waiting for." Evelyn pulled out a folder she'd been keeping separate from the others. "For this. The one piece of information that will end them permanently." She opened it, revealing financial documents Claire recognized. Harold's company is built on fraud. Real, prosecutable fraud. He's been cooking the books for years, inflating values, hiding debts, misleading investors. If this comes out, he doesn't just lose his business. He goes to prison. Claire's breath caught. "How long have you known?" 6 weeks, Evelyn admitted. "I had forensic accountants go through everything. But I didn't tell you because this information is too dangerous to reveal carelessly. It has to be timed perfectly." Before Claire could respond, her phone rang. Not buzzed, rang with an actual call. She looked at the screen, and her stomach dropped. "Graham." She showed Evelyn, who nodded once. "Answer it, but put it on speaker. Let me hear what kind of man calls his ex-wife after the night you just gave him." Claire pressed accept and speaker in one motion. "Hello, Graham." His voice came through rough, exhausted, desperate. "Claire, we need to talk." "We don't need to do anything," she replied calmly. You made your choices. I made mine. We're done talking. Please. The word sounded like it cost him something. Just meet me. One time. Let me explain. Claire looked at Evelyn, who mouthed the word why. She was right. Why did Graham want to meet? What was he hoping to accomplish? Explain what? Claire asked. How you married me for money. How your family orchestrated everything. How you humiliated me in front of hundreds of people. It wasn't supposed to be like that, Graham said, and he almost sounded sincere. You have to believe me. Things got out of control. My mother. Your mother what? Claire cut in. Made you do it? Forced you to lie to me? Held a gun to your head while you stood there and watched them destroy me. The silence on the line stretched for several seconds. When Graham spoke again, his voice was smaller. I was weak. I am weak. I know that now. But Claire, I need your help. There it was. The real reason for the call. Not apology. Not explanation. Need. My help. Claire kept her voice neutral even as anger simmered beneath the surface. What could I possibly help you with, Graham? The people I borrowed money from. They're not patient. They're not reasonable. And they don't care that the divorce happened or that things are complicated now. They want their money. And if I don't pay them soon, he broke off. But the fear in his voice finished the sentence for him. Claire felt Evelyn watching her, evaluating how she'd respond. This was a test. Not from Evelyn, but from the universe. Graham was offering her the chance to save him, to prove she was better than the people who'd hurt her. Or she could let him drown in consequences of his own making. Which woman was she now? How much, she asked. Graham exhaled shakily. 300,000. I know it's a lot, but with your inheritance, my inheritance. Claire's voice went cold. The inheritance you tried to steal? The money you married me to access? That inheritance. I know how it sounds, Graham rushed on. But Claire, these people are dangerous. If I don't pay them, they're going to what? She interrupted. Hurt you? Threaten you? Make you afraid? She let each question land. Funny how quickly you found my number when you needed something. How fast you remembered I existed when you were scared. Where was this energy 3 months ago when your family was tearing me apart? Graham's voice cracked. I'm sorry. God, Claire, I'm so sorry. I know I don't deserve your help. I know I don't deserve anything from you. But I'm begging. Have you ever had someone who destroyed you come back begging for mercy? How did it feel? Did you feel powerful or did you feel sick? Claire felt both. No, she said simply. Graham made a sound that might have been a sob. Please. Claire, please. I'll do anything. I'll testify against my mother. I'll give you whatever information you want. Just help me. Now that was interesting. Evelyn's eyes sharpened and she nodded slowly. This could be useful. But Claire wasn't ready to show that card yet. I'll think about it, she said. But Graham, don't call me again. If I decide to help you, and that's a very big if, I'll contact you. Understand? Yes. Yes, I understand. Thank you, Claire. Thank you. She hung up without responding and looked at Evelyn. He's desperate enough to turn on his family. Evelyn nodded thoughtfully. Desperate people make excellent witnesses. But we have to be careful. If we move too fast, Maribel will see it coming and she'll protect herself. Harold too. They're cornered, but they're not stupid. She tapped her fingers on the desk, thinking. We need more pressure. Something that makes them turn on each other before we move in for the final blow. Claire felt that familiar spark in her chest again, the one that had kept her standing through the worst night of her life. What if we make them believe one of them is betraying the others? Evelyn's smile was slow and approving. I'm listening. Claire stood and began pacing, her mind working through possibilities. Graham just offered to testify against his mother. What if Maribel finds out about that call? What if she believes Graham is already cooperating with us? She'd cut him off completely, Evelyn said, following the logic. Protect herself first. Maybe even throw him under the bus to save her own skin. Exactly, Claire continued. And if Harold thinks both of them are compromised, he'll start making his own deals. The family will fracture from the inside. They'll destroy each other trying to save themselves. Evelyn stood as well, her expression fierce with admiration. Your mother would be so proud of you right now. You're not just seeking revenge. You're conducting psychological warfare. Claire stopped pacing and met her eyes. They taught me well. They showed me exactly how effective cruelty can be when it's carefully applied. I'm just using their own methods against them. She moved to the window, looking out at the city below. For 3 months, I've been patient. I've been quiet. I've let them think I was broken and hiding. But I wasn't hiding, Evelyn. I was learning. I was preparing. And now they're going to understand what it feels like to be powerless while someone systematically takes everything you thought was yours. Evelyn came to stand beside her. So we let Graham's call leak to Maribel. We plant evidence that he's cooperating. We watch them turn on each other. And while they're destroying themselves, we prepare the final blow, Claire finished. The fraud charges. The evidence that puts Harold in prison. The information that destroys their family completely. The plan settled between them like a living thing, dangerous and perfect. But Evelyn's expression grew serious. Claire, I need you to understand something. Once we do this, there's no going back. These aren't just social consequences anymore. We're talking about criminal charges, prison time, the complete destruction of a family's legacy. She paused. Are you certain this is what you want? Because revenge doesn't fix what they broke inside you. It doesn't heal the wounds. It doesn't give you back the trust they destroyed. Claire thought about that night at the family reunion. The champagne, the laughter, the feeling of being so utterly alone while surrounded by people. She thought about signing those divorce papers with shaking hands, believing she was worthless, believing she deserved the humiliation. Then she thought about discovering her mother's inheritance, about learning that every moment with Graham had been a calculated lie, about understanding that they targeted her, used her, planned to discard her like trash. You're right, she said quietly. Revenge won't heal me, but justice might. And making sure they never do this to anyone else, that definitely will. Evelyn studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. Then we proceed. Carefully, methodically, with absolute precision. She walked back to her desk and pulled out another file. I've been compiling evidence for months. Every financial irregularity, every lie, every crime. When we're ready, we'll hand it all to the authorities wrapped in a bow so perfect they'll have no choice but to prosecute. She looked up. But first, we fracture the family. Make them weak. Make them desperate. Make them willing to destroy each other to save themselves. Claire returned to her chair, feeling the weight of what they were planning. This wasn't just revenge anymore. It was the systematic dismantling of everything the Winters family had built on lies and cruelty and stolen money. It was justice for her mother, who'd been disowned for falling in love. Justice for Claire herself, who'd been targeted and used. And maybe, in some way, justice for every person the family had hurt over the years with their arrogance and cruelty. How long, she asked. Evelyn considered. 2 weeks. Maybe 3. Long enough for Graham's betrayal to spread. Long enough for them to start making fatal mistakes. Then we strike. Claire nodded, accepting the timeline. 2 more weeks of patience. 2 more weeks of watching and waiting while the family tore itself apart. It should have felt like torture. Instead, it felt like power. Because she wasn't waiting helplessly anymore. She wasn't hoping someone would save her. She was the one in control now. She was the one deciding when and how the final blow would fall. And when it did, the Winters family would understand something they should have learned 3 months ago. Claire Winters wasn't weak. She wasn't broken. She wasn't defeated. She was patient. She was intelligent. She was her mother's daughter. And she was absolutely unstoppable. Outside the window, the city continued its rhythm, unaware that in this quiet brownstone, a woman was planning the complete destruction of a family that had thought themselves untouchable. The storm that had started at the gala was still building. And when it finally broke, nothing would be left standing. The question wasn't if they would fall. The question was how far. And the answer, Claire knew with absolute certainty, was all the way to the bottom. The leak happened on a Tuesday morning. Maribel was having coffee in her sunroom when her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The text was brief but devastating. Your son is cooperating with Claire Winters. He's providing financial records and testimony in exchange for debt forgiveness. Thought you should know before you're blindsided. Attached were screenshots of what appeared to be text messages between Graham and an attorney, discussing terms for his cooperation. Maribel's hands shook as she read them, her perfectly composed face cracking with fury. The messages were fake, of course. Evelyn had crafted them with surgical precision, mimicking Graham's writing style, using real legal terminology, making them absolutely convincing. But Maribel didn't know that. All she knew was that her son, the weak, pathetic disappointment she'd been protecting for 30 years, was betraying her to save himself. Claire watched from across the street, sitting in a car with tinted windows, as Maribel's silhouette moved frantically through the sunroom. She's calling someone, Evelyn said from the driver's seat, holding binoculars. Probably Harold. This is going to cascade fast. Within an hour, Harold's car pulled up to the mansion. Claire and Evelyn couldn't hear the conversation, but they didn't need to. The body language told them everything. Harold's gestures were sharp, aggressive. Maribel's posture was defensive. They were fighting, accusations flying, trust crumbling. How long before they call Graham? Claire asked. Evelyn checked her watch. I give it 30 minutes. They'll want to confront him directly, try to figure out if it's real. And when he denies it, and he will, because he doesn't know about the fake messages, they won't believe him. They'll think he's lying to protect himself. She lowered the binoculars and looked at Claire. This is the moment when families break, when fear becomes stronger than loyalty, when everyone starts protecting themselves instead of each other. Sure enough, 27 minutes later, Graham's car screeched into the driveway. He practically ran to the door, his face pale, his movements panicked. He got the same message, Evelyn said with satisfaction. I sent him a version too, claiming his mother was already making deals to protect herself. Now he thinks she's betraying him while she thinks he's betraying her. Classic prisoner's dilemma. Claire felt a twinge of something. Not quite guilt, but an awareness of the magnitude of what they were doing. They're family. Even after everything, they're still family. Doesn't that mean something? Evelyn turned to her, expression serious. They didn't consider you family when they humiliated you. They didn't show mercy when you signed those papers in tears. They didn't hesitate when they tried to steal your mother's fortune. She paused. The only reason you're questioning this now is because you're not like them. You still have empathy. You still feel guilt. And that's exactly why you'll use this power better than they ever did. Claire nodded slowly, pushing down the doubt. Evelyn was right. This wasn't cruelty. This was the consequence. This was the inevitable result of their own actions coming back to destroy them. Inside the mansion, the confrontation was escalating. Through the windows, they could see Graham gesturing frantically, Maribel pointing accusingly, Harold standing between them with clenched fists. Then Vivian arrived, adding another layer of chaos. She'd been summoned by Graham in his panic, but her presence only made things worse. Maribel turned on her immediately, years of restrained contempt finally breaking free. This is perfect, Evelyn murmured. Vivian's the wedge that'll split them completely. Maribel never wanted Graham to marry her. Thought she was a gold digger, which is ironic considering their plan with Claire. Now she'll blame Vivian for Graham's weakness, and Graham will have to choose between his mother and his fiancée. Claire watched as Vivian's face crumpled, as she grabbed Graham's arm, as he pulled away slightly. The smallest gesture, but it told volumes. He was already choosing his mother over her, just like he'd chosen his mother over Claire. Some patterns never changed. How long do we let this play out? Claire asked. Evelyn started the car. We give them 3 days to tear each other apart. Then we introduce the next piece. The evidence about Harold's fraud. But this time, we make it look like it's coming from inside the family. Back at the brownstone, Claire found herself in her room, Staring at old photographs Evelyn had given her of her mother. The resemblance was striking. Same dark eyes, same determined jaw, same small smile that hid deeper thoughts. She would have handled this better than me, Claire said when Evelyn knocked and entered. She would have been stronger, more certain. Evelyn sat beside her on the bed, looking at the photographs. Your mother was strong in different ways. She walked away from her family because she chose love over money. That took tremendous courage. She picked up one photo, studying it. But she also spent her life running, hiding her wealth, protecting you by keeping you separate from that world. And, in the end, it left you vulnerable, alone, without the tools to fight back when wolves came calling. She set the photo down gently. You're doing what she couldn't. You're not running. You're standing your ground and making them face consequences. That's not weakness, Claire. That's evolution. The words settled something inside Claire. She'd been carrying guilt about her mother's death, about the childhood spent in foster care, about being the daughter who hadn't lived up to some imagined legacy. But maybe her mother's legacy wasn't about being perfect. Maybe it was about surviving, about learning, about becoming strong enough to protect yourself and others from people who saw kindness as weakness. Tell me about the next phase, Claire said, setting aside the photographs. Evelyn pulled out her tablet, all business again. In 3 days, we leaked documents to a financial journalist, one who's been investigating corporate fraud for years. The documents will show Harold's company has been cooking books, hiding losses, inflating assets to maintain credit lines. But the leak will appear to come from someone with internal access, someone like Maribel or Graham. She pulled up a mock email draft. The journalist will reach out to Harold for comment, and Harold will know immediately that the leak came from inside the family. He'll suspect Maribel first, since she has access to his financial records through their shared attorneys. The paranoia will be complete. And then, Claire asked, then Harold makes his own deal. He'll try to cut a plea agreement, probably throwing Maribel under the bus for the Charity Foundation fraud. Maribel will retaliate by revealing Graham's gambling debts and his deals with loan sharks. Graham will panic and try to save himself by giving up both parents. Evelyn's smile was cold. They'll destroy each other, trying to be the first one to cooperate with authorities. And by the time they realize they've been manipulated, it'll be too late. The evidence will be public. The investigations will be launched. And nothing they say about being tricked will matter, because the crimes are real. Claire absorbed this, understanding the brilliance of it. Evelyn hadn't invented crimes. She'd simply exposed ones that already existed, then orchestrated the timing so the family would tear itself apart in panic. What's my role in the next 3 days? Evelyn handed her a different folder. You're going to meet with Graham. He's been calling constantly, getting more desperate. You're going to agree to help him, or at least pretend you're considering it. You're going to ask him questions about his family's business dealings, about his mother's finances, about his father's company. He'll tell you everything because he's terrified and you're his only hope. The thought of sitting across from Graham, pretending concern while extracting information, made Claire's stomach turn. But she understood why it was necessary. He'll see through it. He'll know I'm using him. Evelyn shook her head. He'll see what he wants to see. A woman who still cares about him despite everything. A former wife who's conflicted about revenge. He'll convince himself that there's still something between you because that's the story that lets him sleep at night. She paused. And Claire, you need to let him believe it. You need to be kind, sympathetic, understanding, because the information he gives you will be the final nails in his family's coffin. Could she do that? Could she fake compassion for a man who'd betrayed her so completely? Claire thought about the woman she'd been 3 months ago, trusting, naive, desperate to be loved. That woman would have said no. That woman would have said it was too cruel, too manipulative. But that woman had signed divorce papers in tears while her husband watched without emotion. That woman had been destroyed for entertainment. That woman was gone. When do I meet him? Claire asked, her voice steady. Tomorrow. Neutral location. Coffee shop in the financial district. Public enough that he'll feel safe, private enough that he'll talk freely. Evelyn stood, heading for the door. Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow starts the final phase, and once it begins, it moves fast. Within a week, everything will be over. After she left, Claire sat alone with her thoughts. She tried to imagine what the end would look like. Graham in financial ruin. Mary Bell facing criminal charges. Harold in prison. The family was completely destroyed. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like gravity. Inevitable, impersonal, just the natural consequence of the forces they'd set in motion. She thought about forgiveness, about mercy, about whether there was any path where she could walk away without finishing what she'd started. But every time she considered it, she remembered the sound of champagne hitting her shoulder. The laughter. The phones recorded her humiliation. Graham's cold eyes. Mary Bell's satisfied smile. And she knew there was no walking away. Not now. Not after everything. The next morning, Claire dressed carefully for her meeting with Graham. Nothing too expensive that would remind him of her inheritance. Nothing too casual that would suggest she'd moved on completely. She settled on simple elegance, a sweater, dark jeans, minimal makeup. The costume of a woman still healing, still uncertain. Marcus drove her to the coffee shop, parking where he could watch the entrance. He's already inside, Marcus said, checking his phone. Corner table. Ordered 2 coffees. Claire took a deep breath. How do I look? Marcus met her eyes in the rearview mirror. Like someone who's about to win a war they never wanted to fight. She stepped out of the car into the cold morning air. Through the coffee shop window, she could see Graham sitting exactly where Marcus said he'd be. He looked terrible, unshaven, hollow-eyed, wearing the same clothes he'd probably slept in. The golden boy who'd had everything was falling apart in real time. Claire pushed open the door and walked toward him. When Graham looked up and saw her, his face transformed with desperate hope. It was the look of a drowning man seeing a life preserver. And Claire, carrying the weight of everything she knew about what was coming, sat down across from him and smiled. Hello, Graham. You said you needed to talk. Outside, hidden in the car, Evelyn monitored the conversation through a small device Claire wore. Every word Graham said would be recorded. Every confession, every desperate plea, every piece of information about his family's crimes. He thought he was meeting his ex-wife for coffee. He had no idea he was providing testimony that would destroy everything his family had built. Have you ever watched someone dig their own grave while thinking they're building a ladder? That's what the next hour would be. Graham would talk. Claire would listen. And with every word, the walls would close in tighter around the Winters family until there was no escape left. The silent conspiracy was working perfectly. They turned the family against each other without throwing a single punch, without making a single threat, just by exposing the truth and letting fear do the rest. And now, as Claire sat across from the man who'd betrayed her, pretending sympathy while gathering the final evidence needed to destroy him, she understood something profound. Revenge wasn't about anger. It wasn't about cruelty. It was about patience, about intelligence, about understanding human nature well enough to make people destroy themselves. Mary Bell had taught her that lesson in the worst possible way. And now Claire was about to show her just how well she'd learned it. The end was coming, and nothing could stop it now. Graham looked worse up close. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his hands trembled as he pushed one of the coffee cups toward Claire. Thank you for coming, he said, his voice hoarse. I wasn't sure you would. Claire wrapped her fingers around the warm cup, studying him with the detachment of a scientist observing a specimen. This was the man she'd loved, the man she believed would protect her. Now he just looked small and desperate and pathetic. You said it was urgent, she replied, keeping her tone neutral. Graham nodded frantically. It is. Everything's falling apart, Claire. My family, they think I'm working with you. Someone sent my mother fake messages, making it look like I'm cooperating, giving you information. He laughed bitterly. She doesn't believe me when I say I'm not. My father thinks I'm weak. Vivian's threatening to leave because she can't handle the pressure. And the people I owe money to. He looked up, fear naked in his eyes. They're done waiting. Claire sipped her coffee slowly, letting the silence stretch. She needed him to be nervous. I needed him talking without filters. How much time do you have? Graham's laugh was hollow. Days. Maybe a week, if I'm lucky. They're not subtle people, Claire. They made it very clear what happens if I don't pay. He leaned forward, desperation rolling off him in waves. I know I don't deserve your help. I know what I did was unforgivable. But I'm begging you. Please. I'll do anything. Anything. The word hung between them, heavy with possibility. Claire set down her cup carefully. Tell me something, Graham. That night at the family reunion, when they humiliated me, when your mother poured champagne on me, and your father questioned my worth, and Sylvia called me an orphan, where were you? His face crumpled. I was there. I was watching. And you did nothing. It wasn't a question. Graham's voice broke. I was a coward. I've always been a coward. My mother, she's controlled everything my whole life. Every choice. Every relationship. I thought marrying you would be different, that I could finally have something that was mine. But she found out about your inheritance, and everything changed. Claire's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression calm. This was it. The confession she needed. Change how? Graham ran his hands through his hair, making it stand up in wild angles. She made a plan. Said if I married you, waited until the inheritance cleared, then divorced you, we could take half. Enough to save the family business, pay off my debts, and secure our future. He looked at her with pleading eyes. But I didn't know about that plan at first, Claire. I swear. When I proposed, I actually loved you. Or I thought I did. I don't even know anymore. Claire felt something cold settle in her chest. A part of her had hoped he'd fight this accusation, prove Evelyn wrong, show that some small piece of what they'd had was real. But he was confirming everything. Every suspicion. Every awful truth. When did you find out about the plan? She asked. Her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside. 2 months after the wedding. My mother sat me down and explained everything. The inheritance. The timeline. What we needed to do. His hands clenched into fists. I should have told you then. Should have warned you. But I was already in debt, already drowning. And she convinced me this was the only way out. So you lied to me for months, Claire said softly. Pretended to love me. I planned my destruction. All while I believed we were building a life together. Graham's eyes filled with tears. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I know that's impossible. I'm just asking you to help me survive. And in exchange, I'll tell you everything. Every detail about my family's business. Every crime my father's committed. Every secret my mother's hiding. Everything. There it was. The offer Evelyn had predicted he'd make. The desperation that would turn him into a weapon against his own family. Claire should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt tired. Your father's company, she said carefully. Tell me about the financial irregularities. Graham blinked, surprised by the specific question. How do you know about those? I know a lot of things, Graham. Answer the question. He glanced around the coffee shop nervously, then lowered his voice. He's been cooking the books for years. Inflating asset values to maintain credit lines. Hiding losses in subsidiary companies. Creating fake invoices to show revenue that doesn't exist. He leaned closer. If anyone actually audited the real numbers, the company would collapse overnight. He'd face criminal charges. Fraud. Maybe worse. Claire absorbed this, matching it against the documents Evelyn had already compiled. And your mother? The charity foundation. Graham's expression darkened. That's not charity. She uses it to move money around. Takes donations that are supposed to go to causes and redirects them to personal accounts. Pays for her lifestyle through the foundation so it looks like business expenses. He paused. She's been doing it for years, Claire. Millions of dollars. If the IRS ever looked closely, they are looking, Claire interrupted. His eyes went wide. What? The IRS received the tip. They're investigating the foundation as we speak. She watched the color drain from his face. Your mother's going to face charges, Graham. Probably within the month. Graham's breath came faster, panic setting in. No, that can't. She'll think I did it. She'll think I'm the one who reported her. Are you? Claire asked, already knowing the answer. No, I would never. He stopped, realization dawning. You did it. You reported her. Claire didn't confirm or deny. She just watched him process the information. Watched him understand that his family's destruction was already in motion, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Why are you telling me this? He asked, his voice small. Because I want you to understand something, Claire said, leaning forward. This isn't about you helping me anymore. This isn't about me needing information or evidence. I already have everything I need. The documents, the proof, the witnesses. Your family is finished, Graham, whether you cooperate or not. She paused, letting that sink in. The only question is whether you save yourself or go down with them. Have you ever watched someone realize they've been outplayed from the very beginning? That's what Claire saw in Graham's face. The slow, horrible understanding that every move he'd made had been anticipated. Every desperate play had been accounted for. He'd thought he was negotiating. He'd thought he still had cards to play. But he'd never had any power at all. What do you want from me? He whispered. Claire pulled out a folder from her bag and slid it across the table. Inside is a statement. It details everything you just told me and more. Your father's fraud. Your mother's embezzlement. The plan to steal my inheritance. Every crime you're aware of. She met his eyes. You're going to sign it. You're going to give it to the federal prosecutors who will be contacting you within 48 hours. And you're going to testify against your family when this goes to trial. Graham opened the folder with shaking hands. As he read, his face went from pale to gray. This is everything. If I sign this, they'll hate me forever. They'll disown me, destroy me. They already hate you, Claire said quietly. They already think you betrayed them. The messages I sent made sure of that. Right now, your mother thinks you're cooperating with me. Your father thinks you're weak and disloyal. Signing this document doesn't change their opinion of you. It just makes it official. She leaned back. But it does save you from criminal charges. The prosecutors will give you immunity in exchange for testimony. You'll lose your family, but you'll stay out of prison. And you'll be alive, which is more than you can say if those loan sharks catch up with you. Graham stared at the papers, tears streaming down his face now. I don't have a choice, do I? You always had choices, Claire said. You chose to lie to me. You chose to participate in your family's plan. You chose to stand there and watch while they destroyed me. These are just the consequences of those choices. She pulled out a pen and set it on the table. Sign the statement, Graham. Save yourself. It's the only smart move left. His hand trembled as he picked up the pen. For a long moment, he just held it, staring at the signature line. Then, with a sound that might have been a sob, he pressed pen to paper and signed his name. Claire took the document, checked the signature, and tucked it back into her folder. The prosecutors will contact you soon. Tell them everything. Hold nothing back. And Graham. She stood, preparing to leave. Don't contact me again. Don't call. Don't text. Don't show up at places hoping to talk. We're done. Completely. Forever. Graham looked up at her with devastated eyes. I really did love you once. I know you don't believe me, but it's true. Claire studied him for a long moment. Maybe there had been love once, buried under the lies and manipulation and weakness. Or maybe he was lying even now, trying to salvage some dignity from the wreckage. It didn't matter anymore. Goodbye, Graham, she said, and walked out of the coffee shop without looking back. Marcus was waiting by the car, and she slid into the back seat feeling oddly empty. Did he sign? Marcus asked. Claire held up the folder. He signed everything. Confessed to everything. He's ours. Marcus nodded approvingly and started driving. Evelyn was on the phone before they'd gone 2 blocks. Tell me you got it, she said immediately. Every word, Claire confirmed. The recording, the signed statement, full confession about the fraud, the embezzlement, the plan to steal my inheritance. Everything we need. Evelyn's satisfaction was audible. Then we moved to the final phase. I'm calling the prosecutors now. They'll have the evidence by tonight. Warrants will be issued within 72 hours. The media will have the story within 96. She paused. How are you feeling? How was she feeling? Claire looked out the window at the city passing by, thinking about Graham's tears, his desperate plea for forgiveness, his broken expression when he signed that statement. She should have felt triumphant, vindicated, powerful. Instead, she just felt tired. I'm fine, she said. Just ready for this to be over. Back at the brownstone, Claire found herself in the study where this had all started. The photographs of her mother still sat on the desk, and she picked one up, studying her mother's face. I did it, she whispered to the image. I made them pay for what they tried to do. I protected your legacy. I made sure they'll never hurt anyone else the way they hurt us. The photograph didn't answer, of course. But Claire felt something settle inside her anyway. A sense of completion, of a promise kept. Her mother had built a fortune to protect her daughter. And now Claire had used that fortune to deliver justice. Not just for herself, but for every person the Winters family had stepped on, used, and discarded over the years. Evelyn knocked softly and entered. The prosecutors are meeting tomorrow morning. They want you there to review the evidence before they move forward. She sat down across from Claire. This is it. The final step. Once they have everything, the arrests happen fast. Harold will be taken from his office. Maribel from her home. They'll be charged, arraigned, and held pending trial. The media will be everywhere. The scandal will be enormous. Everything they built will crumble in days. Claire nodded, processing the timeline. And Graham. He'll testify. He'll probably end up in witness protection for a while, until the trials are over and the loan sharks move on to easier targets. He'll lose everything too, but he'll be alive. That's more mercy than he showed you. Evelyn's expression softened. Are you ready for what comes next? For seeing them arrested? For watching their lives destroyed in public the way they destroyed yours? Was she ready? Claire thought about that night at the family reunion one more time. The champagne, the laughter, the signatures on divorce papers, the absolute conviction that she was worthless. Then she thought about Vivian's manipulations, about the years of fraud, about the charity money stolen from people who actually needed it, about every crime, every cruelty, every calculated act of destruction this family had committed. Yes, Claire said, and she meant it absolutely. I'm ready. Let's finish this. Evelyn smiled, fierce and proud. Then, tomorrow, we hand them everything. And by the end of the week, the Winters family will understand what it means to face consequences for their actions. Real consequences. The kind that doesn't go away. She stood, heading for the door. Get some rest tonight, Claire. Tomorrow, we will end them. After Evelyn left, Claire sat alone in the quiet study. Outside, the city moved through its evening rhythm. Thousands of people living their lives, unaware that tomorrow morning, prosecutors would receive evidence that would bring down one of the city's most prominent families. Unaware that a woman who'd been humiliated and discarded had spent 3 months carefully, methodically, building a case that would end careers, destroy legacies, and send people to prison. The first crack had appeared at the gala when Claire revealed herself. Then the family fractured when they turned on each other. Now comes the final break. The one that couldn't be repaired. The one that would shatter everything the Winters family had built on lies and stolen money and casual cruelty. And Claire, sitting in her study with her mother's photographs and Graham's signed confession, felt the weight of what was coming. Not guilt. Not anymore. Just the heavy certainty of gravity, of inevitable consequence, of justice that had been delayed but never denied. Tomorrow, it would all come crashing down, and she would be there to watch every second of it. The grand holiday gala was even more opulent than the first one. Crystal chandeliers dripped light across marble floors polished to mirrors. Ice sculptures melted slowly at the center of tables laden with food that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The city's elite had gathered in their finest clothes, their brightest jewels, their most practiced smiles. They came to see and be seen, to network and compete, to maintain the illusion that wealth made them untouchable. They had no idea they were about to witness the complete destruction of one of their own. Claire stood at the entrance with Evelyn beside her, both dressed in elegant simplicity that made them stand out against the excessive glamour surrounding them. "This is your moment," Evelyn said quietly. "Everything we built leads to this. Are you ready?" Claire took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the folder in her hands. Inside were documents that would end careers, destroy reputations, and send people to prison. 3 months of planning, 3 months of patience, 3 months of careful, strategic warfare. It all came down to the next hour. "I'm ready," Claire said, and stepped into the ballroom. The reaction was immediate. Conversations faltered. Eyes turned. Whispers spread like wildfire through the crowd. Claire Winters, the orphan they'd humiliated, the rejected wife they'd laughed at, the nobody they'd dismissed, was back. And she was walking straight toward the stage where Maribel stood giving the evening's welcome speech. Maribel saw her coming, and her smile froze, becoming a grimace of pure hatred barely masked by social grace. She tried to continue her speech, but the words stumbled, the crowd's attention shifting entirely to Claire's approach. "Ladies and gentlemen," Claire said, her voice carrying across the sudden silence with surprising strength. "I apologize for the interruption, but I have something to share that I think you'll find interesting." Maribel's face went white, then red. "This is a private event, Claire. You weren't invited." Claire smiled, calm and deadly. "Actually, I was invited. By the federal prosecutors who asked me to make a public statement before the arrest happened." She turned to address the crowd fully. "You see, some of you here tonight are about to witness something historic. The complete exposure of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy that's been hiding behind charity galas and family reputations for decades." The room erupted in whispers. Phones came out, recording every second. Claire had counted on that. The same phones that had recorded her humiliation would now record her vindication. 3 months ago, I stood in a room very much like this one," Claire continued, her voice steady and clear. "I was humiliated publicly by the Winters family. They mocked my background, questioned my worth, and forced me to sign divorce papers while hundreds of people laughed and recorded my pain." She paused, letting the memory settle over the crowd. Some faces showed shame now recognition. They'd been there. They'd participated. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known because their arrogance blinded them, was that I'm not the penniless orphan they pretended I was. My mother left me an inheritance worth $47 million. An inheritance this family tried to steal by orchestrating a marriage, planning a divorce, and timing everything to maximize what they could take from me. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Maribel tried to speak, but Harold grabbed her arm, pulling her back. He knew. Claire could see it in his eyes. He knew exactly where this was going, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "But that's not even the worst of their crimes," Claire said, her voice growing stronger. "Harold Winters has been committing corporate fraud for years. Cooking books, inflating assets, hiding losses, creating fake revenue to maintain credit lines and fool investors." She pulled documents from her folder and held them up. "I have the evidence. Bank records, emails, testimony from employees who were ordered to falsify documents. Everything the prosecutors need to prove systematic, deliberate fraud." The crowd's whispers became shouts. Someone yelled a question. Claire ignored them, pressing forward. Maribel Winters has been embezzling from her charity foundation. Millions of dollars that were supposed to help children fund medical research, support families in need. She redirected that money to personal accounts. Paid for her lifestyle with donations meant for people who were suffering. She pulled out more documents. "Again, I have proof. Transaction records, wire transfers, emails discussing how to hide the money trail. Everything needed for prosecution." Maribel finally found her voice. "You lying bitch. How dare you come into my home and spread these vicious, your home." Claire interrupted, her voice cutting like a blade. "This mansion was built with stolen money. maintained with embezzled funds. Everything you touch is tainted by fraud and theft. She turned back to the crowd. And Graham Winters, my ex-husband, has gambling debts exceeding $300,000. Debts he borrowed from organized crime to cover. Debts his family knew about and tried to use my inheritance to pay. She paused, then delivered the blow she'd been saving. Graham has already signed a statement confessing to all of this. He's cooperating with federal prosecutors in exchange for immunity. The warrants for Harold and Maribel's arrest were issued this morning. The authorities are waiting outside right now. The silence that followed was absolute. Then chaos erupted. People rushed for exits. Others pushed forward, phones recording, questions shouting. Through it all, Claire stood perfectly still, watching Maribel's face crumble, watching Harold's composure shatter, watching the careful facade of power and respectability dissolve like sugar in rain. Federal agents entered through the main doors, moving with practiced efficiency. Harold Winters, the lead agent, called. Maribel Winters, you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The agents moved through the crowd, which parted like water. Harold tried to maintain dignity, standing straight even as his hands were cuffed behind his back. But Maribel fought, screaming, accusing, threatening lawsuits and consequences. It was ugly and desperate and exactly what she deserved. Claire watched it all with the detachment of someone observing a play they'd written. This was her creation, her careful planning, her patient execution. Every domino had fallen exactly as predicted, leading to this moment of complete public destruction. As the agents led Harold and Maribel toward the doors, Maribel twisted back, her eyes finding Claire's across the crowd. You think you've won? She spat, her voice venomous. You think destroying us makes you better? You're just like us now. Cruel, calculating, ruthless. Claire walked forward slowly until she stood face to face with her former mother-in-law. You're wrong, she said quietly, but her voice carried in the sudden silence. I'm nothing like you. You destroyed people for entertainment, for greed, because you could. I brought consequences to people who thought they were above them. There's a difference. She stepped back, her voice rising so the entire room could hear. You taught me that power without accountability is just tyranny. That wealth without ethics is just theft. That family without love is just performance. She paused, letting each word land. I didn't raise my voice. I raised the truth. And the truth is that you're not powerful. You're not untouchable. You're just criminals in expensive clothes. And now everyone knows it. Maribel's face twisted with rage and something else, fear. Real, genuine fear of what was coming. Prison. Public shame. The complete annihilation of everything she'd built her identity around. The agents pulled her toward the exit, and this time she didn't resist. She just walked, her head lowered, her spirit broken. The crowd parted for them, and Claire caught glimpses of faces, some shocked, some satisfied, some ashamed. They'd witnessed something unprecedented. The complete, public dismantling of a family that had seemed invincible. As the doors closed behind the agents and their prisoners, the room erupted in conversation. But Claire didn't stay to hear it. She walked toward the exit, Evelyn falling into step beside her, Marcus waiting at the door. That was perfect, Evelyn murmured. Every word, every revelation. You destroyed them completely. Claire nodded, but didn't smile. It's not over yet. There's still the trials. The media coverage. Months of this playing out in public. Evelyn squeezed her arm gently. But the hard part is done. You faced them. You exposed them. You won. Had she won? Claire thought about Graham's broken face in the coffee shop. About Vivian, who'd also been manipulating but was now caught in the wreckage. About Sylvia, who hadn't been arrested, but whose family name was now synonymous with scandal. Outside, the cold air hit Claire's face like a blessing. She stopped on the steps of the mansion, the same steps she'd walked down 3 months ago with nothing but champagne stains and tears. How different this exit felt. How completely she transformed. A reporter rushed forward, shoving a microphone toward her. Ms. Winters. How does it feel to bring down the family that tried to destroy you? Claire looked at the camera, knowing this would be replayed thousands of times. This was her chance to seem vindictive, cruel, triumphant in the ugliest way. But that wasn't who she wanted to be. It feels necessary, she said simply. Not good. Not satisfying. Just necessary. They committed crimes. They hurt people. Someone had to stop them. She paused, then added, I hope this serves as a reminder that no one is above consequence. That patience and truth are more powerful than money and cruelty. And that underestimating people based on their circumstances is the fastest way to lose everything. Then she walked down the steps, got into Marcus's car, and drove away from the mansion for the last time. In the back seat, surrounded by silence and the fading lights of the party behind them, Claire finally let herself feel the weight of what had happened. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. She'd taken down an entire family using nothing but their own crimes, their own weaknesses, their own arrogance against them. Where to now? Marcus asked from the front seat. Claire thought about that. Where did someone go after orchestrating the complete destruction of their enemies? After spending months planning revenge, so comprehensive it would make headlines for years? Home, she said quietly. Take me home. The brownstone was dark and quiet when they arrived. Evelyn had stayed behind to handle media inquiries and coordinate with the prosecutors. Claire was alone for the first time since the gala, and the silence felt heavy and strange. She walked through the house, turning on lights, making tea she didn't drink, trying to figure out what came next. This had consumed her for 3 months. Every waking moment had been spent planning, strategizing, executing the perfect revenge. And now it is done. The arrests had been made. The family was destroyed. Justice had been served. So why did she feel so hollow? She sat in the study, surrounded by her mother's photographs and the documents that had ended the Winters family, and tried to understand her own emotions. Relief was there, definitely. Satisfaction, too. The knowledge that they would face real consequences, that other people were protected from their cruelty, that justice had actually prevailed. But underneath all of that was something else. A kind of sadness that maybe revenge, even perfectly executed revenge, couldn't actually heal the wounds that made it necessary. The woman she'd been 3 months ago, naive, trusting, desperate to belong, was gone forever. That innocence couldn't be recovered. And the woman she'd become, strategic, calculating, capable of orchestrating someone's complete destruction, wasn't entirely comfortable either. She existed somewhere between those two versions of herself, and she wasn't sure yet who that person was. Her phone buzzed with a text from Evelyn. The media is going crazy. You're a hero to some, a villain to others. How are you holding up? Claire typed back, I'm fine. Just tired. We'll talk tomorrow. She set the phone down and picked up a photograph of her mother, studying the woman's face for answers she knew wouldn't come. Did I do the right thing? She whispered to the image. Was this what you would have wanted? The photograph didn't answer. But Claire thought about her mother's legacy. The money carefully saved and hidden to protect her daughter. The plans were made. The sacrifices endured. And she thought maybe her mother would understand. Would approve. Would recognize that sometimes protecting yourself means being willing to fight back. Would see that justice, even when it looks like revenge, still matters. Claire set down the photograph and stood, walking to the window. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm, indifferent to the dramas playing out in mansions and courtrooms and quiet brownstones. Tomorrow, the trials will begin. The media circus would intensify. Her face would be everywhere, analyzed and debated and turned into a symbol of something she'd never intended to represent. But tonight, in this moment of stillness between the storm's fury and its aftermath, Claire Winters let herself simply exist. Not as a victim, not as an avenger, not as a billionaire or an orphan or a wronged wife. Just as a woman who had survived something terrible and found a way to make sure it never happened to anyone else. The question wasn't whether she'd won or lost. The question was what she would build with the life she'd reclaimed. And that answer, Claire knew, would take much longer than 3 months to discover. Outside her window, The city lights flickered like stars, each one representing someone's story, someone's struggle, someone's triumph or tragedy. And Claire, standing in her study with the evidence of her victory scattered around her, understood something profound. The public reckoning had happened. The Winters family was destroyed. Justice had been served. But the real reckoning, the one she'd have to face with herself, with who she'd become and what it had cost, was only just beginning. And that reckoning would be private, personal, and far more difficult than anything she'd faced so far. But she'd face it, just like she'd faced everything else. With patience, with intelligence, with a stubborn determination that had kept her standing when the whole world wanted to watch her fall. The storm had passed. Now comes the work of living in its aftermath. And Claire Winters, transformed by fire and fury into something she was still learning to recognize, was ready. The weeks following the arrests were a blur of legal proceedings, media attention, and decisions that would shape the rest of Claire's life. She sat in her lawyer's office on a Tuesday morning, reviewing documents that outlined exactly how her mother's fortune would be distributed. The inheritance was hers legally and completely, but what she did with it would define who she'd become through all of this. The employee fund is established, her lawyer explained, sliding papers across the desk. Everyone who worked for Harold's company and lost their jobs or pensions because of his fraud will be compensated. Full back pay, plus additional support for job placement and retraining. Claire nodded, signing the authorization. And the charity restoration? The lawyer smiled. Every dollar Mary Bell stole from the foundation has been replaced, plus an additional $10 million for the causes she claimed to support. Children's hospitals, cancer research, family shelters. The money will actually go where it was supposed to go now. Claire felt something loosen in her chest. This was what justice should look like, not just punishment for the guilty, but restoration for the victims. What about Graham's debts? She asked, though she already knew what she decided. The lawyer's expression became carefully neutral. You don't owe him anything, Claire. He participated in the fraud. He lied to you. You'd be completely justified in letting him handle his own problems. Claire looked out the window at the city below, thinking about Graham's broken face in that coffee shop, about his desperate plea for help, about the fact that despite everything, he'd been raised by monsters and never really had a chance to become anything else. Pay them, she said quietly. Pay off his gambling debts. All of them. The lawyer's eyebrows rose. That's $300,000. Money you don't have to spend. I know, Claire replied. But I'm not doing it for him. I'm doing it so I can look at myself in the mirror and know I chose mercy when I could have chosen cruelty. That's the difference between me and them. She signed that authorization to make it anonymous. I don't want him to know it came from me. Just let him wake up one day and find out the debts are cleared and he can actually move forward with his life. The lawyer made notes, then looked up with something like respect. You are a better person than most would be after what you went through. Claire wasn't sure about that. She'd spent 3 months orchestrating a family's destruction with precision that would have impressed a military general. She'd manipulated, calculated, and used people's weaknesses against them without hesitation. But she'd also made sure the consequences were proportional, that innocent people were protected, that the punishment fit the crimes. Maybe that balance was the best anyone could hope for. What's the status of the trials? She asked. The lawyer flipped through another file. Harold's looking at 15 to 20 years for corporate fraud. His attorneys are trying to negotiate a plea, but the evidence is overwhelming. Mary Bell's facing 10 to 15 for embezzlement and charity fraud. She's fighting it, claiming she was coerced by Harold. But the emails and transaction records make it clear she was an active, willing participant. He paused. Graham's testimony will be crucial for both cases. The prosecutors are using his cooperation as leverage to prevent either parent from getting lenient sentences. Claire absorbed this, imagining the family's Thanksgiving dinners for the next 2 decades. Broken, scattered, some in prison, some in witness protection, all of them marked forever by scandal. And Vivian? The lawyer's expression darkened. That's more complicated. Turns out she was running her own scheme, siphoning money from Graham's accounts, while also manipulating his investment decisions to benefit herself. The prosecutors are deciding whether to charge her separately or fold her crimes into the larger case. So everyone had been using everyone else. The whole family had been a nest of vipers, each one poisoning the others while pretending to be unified. Claire felt a strange kind of vindication hearing this. She hadn't destroyed a loving family. She'd exposed people who were already destroying each other, just more slowly. "I want to visit Harold," Claire said suddenly. The lawyer's pen stopped mid-note. "What? In prison? I want to visit him before the trial." Claire met his eyes. "I need to see him. I need to say something I couldn't say before." The lawyer looked deeply uncomfortable. "Claire, I have to advise against that. Anything you say to him could be used in court. It could complicate things legally." "I don't care," Claire said firmly. "Set it up. I'll be careful with my words. But I need to do this." The lawyer sighed, but nodded. "I'll arrange it. But I'm going with you. And if the conversation goes anywhere legally dangerous, I'm ending it immediately." 2 days later, Claire sat across from Harold Winters in a prison visiting room. The man who'd questioned her worth in front of hundreds of people now wore an orange jumpsuit and had lost the arrogant confidence that had once defined him. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by circumstances he could no longer control. "I didn't think you'd come," Harold said, his voice lacking its former authority. "Most people would want to gloat." Claire studied him for a long moment. "I'm not here to gloat. I'm here because I need you to understand something." She leaned forward slightly. "When you and your family humiliated me, when you forced me to sign those papers while everyone laughed, you thought you were dealing with someone powerless. Someone who didn't matter. Someone you could use and discard without consequence." Harold's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. "You were wrong," Claire continued. "Not because of the money, though that certainly helped. You were wrong because you confused kindness with weakness. You mistook patience for stupidity. You assumed that someone who'd been hurt couldn't learn to hurt back." She paused. "But here's what I came to tell you. I didn't do this because I'm cruel like you. I did this because you left me no choice. You targeted me. You planned to rob me. You destroyed me for entertainment. Everything that's happened since has been consequence, not revenge." Harold's eyes flickered with something, maybe understanding, maybe just resignation. "Does it matter?" he asked quietly. "Consequence or revenge, I'm still here. My life is still destroyed." "It matters," Claire said firmly. "Because revenge would have been excessive. Would have been cruel, just to be cruel. What I did was proportional. I exposed real crimes. Protected real victims. Make sure you can't hurt anyone else the way you hurt me." She stood, preparing to leave. "You're in prison because of your choices, Harold. Because you committed fraud. Because you stole from investors. Because you built your empire on lies. I just made sure those choices caught up with you." Harold looked up at her, and for the first time, she saw something like remorse in his eyes. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I'm sorry. For all of it. For what we did to you. For what we tried to do. You deserved better." Claire felt emotion tighten her throat, but kept her voice steady. "Yes, I did. And now you'll have years to think about that." She walked toward the door, then paused. "I paid Graham's debts. All of them. He won't be killed by loan sharks for the mistakes you taught him to make. That's mercy, Harold. That's what it looks like when someone has power, but chooses not to use it cruelly. Remember that in the years ahead." Then she left, not waiting for his response. Outside, the lawyer was waiting with a concerned expression. "How did it go?" Claire took a deep breath of fresh air, feeling lighter somehow. "It went exactly how it needed to. I said what I needed to say. Now I can move forward." The next stop was the children's hospital her mother's foundation was now properly funding. Claire had asked to visit anonymously, but the director insisted on giving her a tour. "Because of your donation, we can expand the cancer ward," the director explained, walking her through bright hallways decorated with children's artwork. "We can hire more specialists, offer treatments we couldn't afford before. You're saving lives, Ms. Winters. Literally saving lives." They stopped outside a playroom where children with 4 poles and bald heads from chemotherapy were laughing and playing games. Claire watched through the window, thinking about Maribel's expensive lifestyle funded by money that should have been helping these kids. My mother would have wanted this, Claire said softly. She believed money should do good in the world, should help people who need it. The director smiled warmly. Well, her daughter is making that belief a reality. The foundation will bear both your names, the Winters Legacy Foundation. Your mother's vision, your execution. Claire felt tears prick her eyes. This was what power should be used for. Not humiliation, not control, not crushing people beneath your heel, but lifting up people who needed help, protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, making sure resources went where they could do the most good. Over the next weeks, Claire established more programs, scholarships for foster children, so kids like her would have opportunities she'd never gotten, support systems for women leaving abusive marriages, so they wouldn't be trapped by financial dependence, job training programs for people affected by corporate fraud, so they could rebuild what criminals like Harold had destroyed. Every program was carefully designed, properly funded, built to last beyond her involvement. She wasn't trying to be a savior. She was trying to be responsible, to use her mother's fortune the way it should be used, not for revenge, but for restoration. Evelyn watched all of this with visible pride. Your mother would be so proud, she said one evening as they reviewed foundation proposals. You took something meant to hurt you and turned it into something that helps thousands. Claire looked up from the papers. I had a choice. I could hoard the money, use it selfishly, become another version of the people who tried to steal it. Or I could honor my mother's memory by doing what she would have done. She paused. It's not about being better than them. It's about being true to who I actually am, underneath all the pain and anger. Evelyn reached across and squeezed her hand. And who is that? Claire thought about the question. 3 months ago, she would have said she was nobody. An orphan, a rejected wife, powerless. Now, I'm someone who survived, Claire said slowly. Someone who learned that patience and intelligence are more powerful than cruelty and money. Someone who discovered that the best revenge is living well and helping others do the same. The media coverage shifted over time. At first, she'd been portrayed as both hero and villain, a woman seeking justice or a calculating manipulator destroying a family. But as her charitable work became public, as people saw what she was doing with her inheritance, the narrative changed. She became a symbol of something larger, of holding the powerful accountable, of using resources ethically, of transforming pain into purpose. Claire didn't read most of the articles, didn't watch the news segments analyzing her choices. She was too busy actually doing the work, making sure every dollar was spent wisely, every program was effective, every person helped actually get what they needed. But she couldn't completely avoid the attention. One morning, a letter arrived at the brownstone. The handwriting was shaky but legible. Grams. Claire almost threw it away without reading. Then curiosity got the better of her and she opened it. Claire, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that I understand now what I did to you, what my family did. The prosecutor showed me the recordings from the reunion, and I watched myself stand there while you were destroyed. I watched myself participate in your humiliation, and I was ashamed in a way I've never experienced before. The letter continued, I know you paid my debts. My lawyer told me it was anonymous, but I knew it was you. No one else would have that kind of mercy for someone who deserved none. Thank you. Not just for the money, but for showing me what actual strength looks like, what actual power does. You could have let me die. Instead, you gave me a chance to become someone different. I'm going to try to deserve that chance. The letter ended. I'll testify at the trials. I'll tell the complete truth about everything. It's the least I can do. And then I'm going to disappear for a while. Try to figure out who Graham Winters is when he's not his mother's puppet or his family's legacy. Maybe I'll never figure it out. But I owe it to myself to try. And I owe it to you to at least attempt to become someone who wouldn't have hurt you in the first place. Thank you for the mercy I didn't deserve. Thank you for being strong enough to show me what I should have been. Graham. Claire read the letter twice, then carefully folded it and put away. She didn't forgive him. Not entirely. Maybe not ever. But she accepted his acknowledgement. Accepted that he was trying, however imperfectly, to become better. And that was enough. That night, sitting in her study with her mother's photographs and the foundation paperwork and letters from people whose lives had been changed by her programs, Claire felt something she hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not happiness exactly. Not the simple joy of someone whose life had been easy, but the deeper, more complex peace of someone who had faced terrible things and found a way through, who had been given power and used it responsibly, who had chosen mercy when cruelty would have been easier. She thought about Maribel's words at the arrest, "You're just like us now." But Maribel had been wrong. Claire wasn't like them. She'd been tested by the same temptations, power, money, the ability to hurt people who'd hurt her, and she'd chosen differently. Not because she was better or stronger or more moral, but because she'd remembered, even in her darkest moments, that the person she became mattered more than the revenge she achieved. Have you ever had to choose between becoming the monster who hurt you or staying true to who you are? It's the hardest choice there is. Claire had made that choice, and she'd chosen herself. Not the broken version the Winters family had tried to create. Not the vengeful version that could have emerged, but the version that honored her mother's memory, protected vulnerable people, and used power as a tool for justice rather than cruelty. The trials would continue. The media attention would eventually fade. Years from now, people might forget the details of this scandal, but Claire would remember, would carry the lessons learned through fire and fury and careful, patient warfare. And those lessons would shape every choice she made for the rest of her life. The moral victory wasn't in the arrests or the confessions or the public humiliation of people who'd wronged her. The moral victory was in the woman she'd chosen to become despite it all. Strong but not cruel. Powerful but not tyrannical. Wealthy but not selfish. That was the victory that actually mattered. And that was the victory she'd carry forward into whatever came next. 6 months had passed since the night that changed everything. Claire stood at the window of her new office overlooking the city, watching the sun rise over buildings that had once seemed like towers of impossible wealth and power. Now they were just buildings, just glass and steel, and the dreams of people trying to make their way in a complicated world. The Winters Legacy Foundation occupied the entire 10th floor of this building, and every morning when Claire arrived, she felt her mother's presence in the work they were doing. The final trial verdict came through, Evelyn said, entering with her tablet and 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Claire and pulled up the news article. Harold is 18 years old. Maribel got 12. Both are appealing, but the prosecutors say the evidence is too solid for the sentences to be reduced. Claire read the article silently, studying the photographs of Harold and Maribel being led from the courthouse. They looked older now, diminished by months of legal battles and the reality of their convictions. She felt no triumph looking at those images, just a quiet sense of completion. Graham testified yesterday. Evelyn continued. Final day of his cooperation agreement. The prosecutor said his testimony was crucial in securing both convictions. She paused. He's entering witness protection next week. New identity. New city. Fresh start. Claire nodded slowly. I hope he uses it well. I hope he becomes the person he wrote about in that letter. She set down her coffee and turned from the window. But that's his journey now, not mine. Evelyn smiled, the expression warm and proud. Look at you. 6 months ago, you were sitting in my study, broken and furious, learning that the family who destroyed you had been targeting you from the beginning. Now you're running a foundation that's changed thousands of lives. You've grown, Claire. Has she grown? Claire thought about the woman who'd signed divorce papers with trembling hands. The woman who'd walked out of that mansion believing she was nothing. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone she'd known in another lifetime. I survived, Claire said simply. And then I decided what kind of person I wanted to be with that survival. That's not growth exactly. That's the choice. Evelyn's eyes sparkled with understanding. Choice is the most powerful form of growth there is. The morning meeting brought Claire face to face with the foundation's impact in concrete terms. The scholarship program had funded education for 200 foster children. The support system for women leaving abusive marriages had helped 63 women escape dangerous situations and rebuild their lives. The job training program had placed 147 people in stable employment after corporate fraud had destroyed their previous careers. Numbers on a spreadsheet transformed into actual human beings, children who could now go to college, women who could now live without fear, workers who could now support their families. We need to talk about expansion, the foundation director said, pulling up a presentation. We've been contacted by organizations in 3 other states asking if we can replicate these programs in their communities. The demand is massive, Claire. What you've built here could help tens of thousands more people if we scale it properly. Claire studied the proposal, feeling the weight of responsibility that came with real power. What would we need? The director launched into details about funding, staffing, and partnerships with local organizations. Claire listened carefully, asking questions, evaluating feasibility. This was what power should look like: careful planning, ethical consideration, sustainable growth. Not the reckless dominance the Winters family had wielded like a weapon. After the meeting, Claire found herself alone in her office, thinking about scale and impact and the long game she was now playing. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Sylvia Winters. Can we talk, please?" Claire stared at the message for a long moment. Sylvia, the sister-in-law who'd called her an orphan, who'd participated in her humiliation, who'd stood by while her family tried to destroy her. What could Sylvia possibly want to say now? Against her better judgment, Claire typed back, "I'm listening." The response came quickly, not over text. In person. "I know I don't deserve your time, but I'm asking anyway. There's something I need to tell you. Something about my family that you should know." Curiosity won out over caution. Claire agreed to meet at a neutral coffee shop, not the one where she'd met Graham. Somewhere new, without those memories. Sylvia arrived looking nothing like the polished, diamond-draped woman from the reunion. She wore simple clothes, minimal makeup, and carried herself with something that almost looked like humility. "Thank you for coming," Sylvia said as they sat down. "I wasn't sure you would." Claire studied her carefully. "What do you want, Sylvia?" Sylvia took a breath, gathering courage. "I want to apologize. Not because I think it'll change anything. Not because I expect forgiveness, but because you deserve to hear it from me directly." She twisted her hands together nervously. "That night at the reunion, when we humiliated you, I knew it was wrong. I knew what we were doing was cruel and calculated and evil. But I participated anyway, because that's what my family does. We destroy people to feel powerful. We mock weakness to hide our own." Her voice cracked slightly. "And I was weak. Too weak to stand up to my mother. Too cowardly to defend you. Too concerned with my own position in the family to do the right thing." Claire listened without interrupting, watching Sylvia struggle with words that clearly cost her something to speak. "When you exposed us at the gala, when I saw my parents arrested, when everything fell apart, I was angry at first. Blamed you for destroying my family. But then I started actually looking at what my family had done. The fraud, the embezzlement, the decades of hurting people." Sylvia met Claire's eyes. "We deserved it. All of it. And you were merciful in ways we never would have been. You could have destroyed me too. Exposed affairs, or financial problems, or any of the dozen things I'm sure you discovered while investigating us. But you didn't. You focused on the actual criminals and let the rest of us live with our shame privately." She paused. "Why? Why show me mercy when I showed you none?" Claire considered the question. "Because you didn't commit crimes. You were cruel, yes. You participated in my humiliation. But cruelty isn't illegal, Sylvia. If I'd gone after you for being mean, I would have been crossing a line from justice into vengeance. And I didn't want to become the kind of person who destroys people just because I can. Sylvia's eyes filled with tears. I don't deserve that distinction. But thank you for making it anyway. She wiped her eyes quickly. I'm leaving the country. Starting over somewhere new with my daughter. My husband and I are divorcing. Turns out we were both miserable, just too proud to admit it. I'm taking the opportunity to build a different kind of life. She pulled an envelope from her bag. This is for your foundation. It's not much. Most of my money is tied up in the divorce. But it's something. A gesture. An attempt to do some good with resources that came from a family that did mostly harm. Claire opened the envelope and found a check for $50,000. Not a fortune, but clearly a significant amount for Sylvia given her circumstances. You don't have to do this, Claire said. I know, but I want to. I need to. It's part of how I'm trying to become someone different. Sylvia stood, preparing to leave. I don't expect us to be friends. I don't expect forgiveness. But I wanted you to know that what you did, holding my family accountable, using your power responsibly, showing mercy where it wasn't earned, it changed me. Made me look at myself and realize I'd been living a lie my whole life. She paused at the door. You're extraordinary, Claire. Not because of the money or the revenge or the victory, but because you stayed human through all of it. You could have become a monster. Instead, you became a builder. That's the real lesson here. After Sylvia left, Claire sat with the check and the conversation, processing this unexpected development. How many people had been changed by what happened? Not just the obvious ones. Harold in prison, Mary Bell facing consequences, Graham in witness protection. But the peripheral ones. Sylvia finds courage to leave an unhappy marriage. Employees getting second chances. Foster children getting scholarships. Women escaping abuse. The ripples extended far beyond what Claire could see or measure. She thought about the question Evelyn had asked weeks ago. Does it matter if it was consequence or revenge? Now Claire knew the answer. It mattered enormously. Consequence created change. Revenge just created more pain. Consequence held people accountable while offering paths forward. Revenge trapped everyone in cycles of retaliation. Consequences could transform communities. Revenge only transformed individuals, usually for the worse. By choosing consequence over revenge, by using her power to restore rather than destroy, Claire had started something bigger than herself. Something that would outlast the scandal, outlast the trials, outlast even her own lifetime if the foundation was built properly. That night, Claire returned to the brownstone where this journey had truly begun. Evelyn was waiting with dinner and wine and the comfortable silence of family that had been forged through a crisis. I saw Sylvia today, Claire said as they ate. She apologized, donated to the foundation, said she's leaving the country to start over. Evelyn raised her eyebrows. How did that feel? Claire thought about it. Strange. Good. Like closure I didn't know I needed. She's not evil, Evelyn. None of them were, not really. They were just people who'd learned the wrong lessons about power and worth, who'd been raised in a system that rewarded cruelty and punished empathy. Does that excuse what they did to you? Evelyn asked quietly. No, Claire said firmly. Understanding isn't an excuse. They still made choices. It still hurts people. Still deserve consequences. But understanding helps me let go of the anger. Helps me see them as human rather than monsters. And that's important for my own peace. Evelyn nodded thoughtfully. Your mother would be so proud of that wisdom. She always said the hardest thing in the world was seeing your enemies clearly, not as demons, but as broken people. Most never learn that lesson. They finished dinner talking about foundation business, about expansion plans, about the future that stretched ahead bright with possibility. Later, alone in her room, Claire pulled out the photograph of her mother that she kept on her nightstand. She studied her mother's face, the same face she saw in the mirror every morning, but wiser, older, marked by experiences Claire was only beginning to understand. I did it, Mom, she whispered to the photographer. I protected your legacy. I used your fortune the way you would have wanted. I became strong without becoming cruel. I hope that's enough. I hope you're proud." The photograph didn't answer, but Claire felt certain of what her mother would say if she could. Not, "I'm proud you destroyed them," but, "I'm proud you survived. I'm proud you chose mercy. I'm proud you became the woman I always knew you could be." The next morning brought news that the Winters family home, the mansion where Claire had been humiliated, was being sold at auction to cover legal fees and restitution payments. Claire attended the auction not to buy, but to witness. She stood in the back of a room as bidders competed for a piece of the family's fallen empire, watching strangers tear apart what had once seemed untouchable. The mansion sold for less than expected. The antiques and artwork went for bargain prices. The jewelry Maribel had worn while mocking Claire's poverty was divided into lots and distributed to the highest bidders. Everything that had represented the Winters family's power was scattered to the winds, transformed from symbols of dominance into mere objects with price tags. As Claire left the auction house, she realized she felt nothing looking at that dissolution. No satisfaction, no regret, just indifference. The Winters family had lost their power over her completely, not just their ability to hurt her, but their ability to make her feel anything at all. They were just people now. Flawed, fallen, facing consequences. Nothing more. Where to next? Marcus asked from the driver's seat. Claire thought about the question. Not just where to drive, but where to go with her life. She'd spent 6 months building the foundation, establishing programs, ensuring her mother's fortune did good in the world. That work would continue. But what about her? Who was Claire Winters when she wasn't fighting battles or building legacies? "Take me to the park," she said. "I want to walk." The park was filled with normal people doing normal things. Families having picnics. Children playing on swings. Couples holding hands. Dogs chasing balls. All the simple, beautiful ordinariness of life that Claire had missed while fighting wars. She walked slowly along the paths, letting the normalcy wash over her, reminding herself that this was what she'd fought for. Not revenge, not victory, but the right to live a life that wasn't defined by other people's cruelty. The right to be ordinary. A little girl ran past chasing a butterfly, her laughter pure and unself-conscious. Her mother called out, "Be careful," but smiled as she watched her daughter play. Claire stopped walking and just watched them, feeling something shift inside her chest. This is what she wanted. Not more battles. Not more justice campaigns. Just peace. Quiet. The chance to build a life that was hers alone, defined by her choices rather than her traumas. She pulled out her phone and called Evelyn. "I'm taking a vacation," Claire announced. 2 weeks. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere no one knows who I am or what I've done. Somewhere I can just exist without being Claire Winters the whistleblower, or Claire Winters the philanthropist, or Claire Winters the woman who brought down a dynasty. Evelyn laughed, the sound warm and approving. "About time. Where are you thinking?" "I don't know yet," Claire admitted. "Somewhere with the ocean, maybe. Somewhere I can walk on beaches and read books and remember what it feels like to have nothing more pressing than choosing what to eat for dinner." "Go," Evelyn said firmly. "The foundation will be here when you get back. The work will wait. You've earned rest, Claire. You've earned peace." That night, Claire booked a cottage on a remote beach in Maine. No internet. No television. Just books and ocean, and time to figure out who she was when she wasn't at war. As she packed, she found the divorce papers she'd signed that terrible night. Papers she'd kept as a reminder of where she'd started. She read through them one last time, seeing her shaky signature on each page, remembering the woman who'd signed them, believing she'd lost everything. That woman had been wrong. She hadn't lost everything. She'd lost illusions, lost false family, lost a life built on lies. But she'd gained something far more valuable, herself. The real Claire Winters. Not the desperate orphan trying to belong. Not the rejected wife destroyed by cruelty. Not even the avenger bringing down her enemies. Just Claire. A woman who'd survived trauma and chose mercy. Who'd inherited power and used it responsibly. Who'd been given every reason to become bitter and chose to become better instead. She took the divorce papers to the fireplace and burned them, watching the signatures curl and blacken and disappear into ash. She didn't need reminders anymore. Didn't need to carry that night with her wherever she went. It was over. Finished. Part of her history, but not her identity. The flames consumed the last page, and Claire felt lighter than she'd felt in years. Free. Actually, genuinely free. 2 days later, she stood on a beach in Maine watching the sun set over the Atlantic. The water was cold, and the wind was sharp, and everything was beautifully, perfectly normal. No one here knew who she was. No one cared about the winter's scandal or the foundation or any of it. She was just another woman on a beach, watching waves crash against rocks that had stood for millions of years and would stand for millions more. Her phone buzzed with messages, foundation updates, media requests, legal notifications about the final appeals. She turned it off and put it away. For 2 weeks, the world could manage without her. For 2 weeks, she would just be. Not building, not fighting, not proving, just existing, breathing, healing. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and pink, Claire felt tears running down her face. Not sad tears. Not angry tears. Just release. The kind of crying that comes when you finally feel safe enough to let go. She'd signed those divorce papers believing she'd lost everything. She'd walked out of that mansion thinking her life was over. But standing here, with ocean spray on her face and peace in her heart and a future stretching ahead filled with possibility, she understood the truth. She hadn't lost anything that night. She'd been set free. Free from people who never valued her. Free from lies disguised as love. Free from a life that would have slowly destroyed her if it had continued. Everything that happened after, the inheritance, the revenge, the foundation, the transformation, was just Claire learning to use that freedom. Learning to become herself. Learning that the woman she'd always been, underneath the desperation and need, was strong enough to survive anything. Strong enough to build anything. Strong enough to choose mercy over cruelty, justice over revenge, purpose over pain. The stars began appearing above the ocean, thousands of points of light that had traveled unimaginable distances to reach this beach, this moment, this woman standing alone with her hard-won peace. And Claire Winters, daughter, orphan, wife, avenger, philanthropist, survivor, smiled at them. She'd spent 3 months planning the perfect revenge. She'd spent 6 months building the perfect legacy. Now she would spend the rest of her life learning the perfect lesson, that she'd always been enough, even when the whole world tried to convince her otherwise. That she'd always been powerful, even when she believed herself weak. That she'd always been extraordinary, even when others tried to make her feel ordinary. The Winters family had tried to break her. Instead, they'd freed her, tried to destroy her. Instead, they'd forged her into something unbreakable, tried to prove she was nothing. Instead, they'd given her the opportunity to prove she was everything. Have you ever looked back at the worst moment of your life and realized it was actually the beginning of your best one? That's where Claire stood now, at the end of a journey that had started with humiliation and tears, but ended with power and peace. The divorce papers had been signed in tears. But Claire Winters had signed her name to something far more important in the months since, a life that was truly, finally, completely her own. And that was the victory that actually mattered, not the arrests or the convictions or the public humiliation of people who'd wronged her, but the private, perfect triumph of becoming exactly who she was meant to be. The ocean crashed against the rocks. The stars wheeled overhead. And Claire Winters, transformed by fire into something unbreakable, walked back to her cottage, ready for whatever came next. Because she'd learned the most important lesson of all. She didn't need anyone's approval to be worthy. Didn't need revenge to be powerful. Didn't need anything except the courage to keep becoming herself, one choice at a time. And that courage? That had always been there. She just needed to remember it. The end was actually a beginning. And the woman who'd signed those papers in tears had become the woman who signed her name to a legacy of justice, mercy, and unshakable strength. That transformation, that was the real story. And it was far from over. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please hit the subscribe button and drop a comment telling us the part of the story you enjoyed most.